The raven came to Winterfell on a hard gray morning when the snow was falling in slow, lazy sheets, thick enough to blur the towers and the training yard and the distant ring of the old godswood. Robb Stark stood beneath the covered walk by the great hall, watching the flakes drift down onto the stone steps, where ice had once shone in his father's hands. Now the ancestral greatsword was gone, and so was the man who had wielded it. The raven on Maester Luwin's shoulder would finish that. Catelyn Stark was still wearing her riding cloak. Mud spattered up the hem when she came pelting across the yard, skirts clutched in gloved hands. Her cheeks were flushed with cold and sleeplessness. She had ridden through the night from the south, the last roads of the neck behind her. Robb went to meet her without thought, his own cloak whipping around his legs. "Mother," he said, and stopped when he saw her face. The words were already burning her tongue. "They have taken him," she said. "Your father. They've seized him in the Red Keep. Treason, they say." The wind gusted suddenly, driving the snow sideways. Somewhere across the yard, Grey Wind lifted his great gray head and began to pace, restless as a caged storm. Robb heard himself say, "He will talk his way free. It's all a mistake. The king is dead." Her voice was a blade sliding home. "Robert has fallen in the hunt. The queen moves the boy, Joffrey, like a Savas piece. And your father, Ned, refused to bend. Littlefinger betrayed him. They've thrown him in the black cells." The yard seemed to tilt a little. The snow kept falling, soft and quiet, as if the world had not just shifted around them. Robb closed his hand hard around the wet, cold stone of the nearest pillar until his knuckles ached. "Then we ride," he said. "We call the banners." It was not what Catelyn had come intending to say. For half the ride north, she had thought to counsel patience, letters, envoys, careful steps that would not plunge the north into fire. But she looked at her son, and he was no boy now. Not truly. He had grown into his father's height, his father's jaw, and there was iron where she had been expecting boyish heat. "The Lannisters hold him," she said. "Cersei sits the throne behind her son. Tywin commands the west. If we ride to war, Robb. And if we do not," his blue eyes were very clear, "they will kill him in that city and send back his head in a box. I won't wait for that raven." Snowflakes clung to his hair and lashes. He did not seem to feel them. Catelyn thought of Ned's gray eyes, the way they crinkled when he smiled. She thought of the last time she had held his hand. The choice was a noose whichever way it turned. "Call them then," she said. "Call the Umber and the Manderly, the Karstark and the Glover, the Tallheart and the Hornwood. But when you do it, remember this. Every life that marches south will be one you carry with you. Men will die for you, Robb. They will die for father," he said. But the words sat differently in his mouth this time. He nodded once, as if accepting some private judgment. "I will not forget." Later, in the dim warmth of the great hall, the banners went up one by one along the walls. The dire wolf of Stark in gray and white, the seahorse of Manderly, the roaring giant of Umber, flayed men and dead trees and black bears on yellow. Lords from every corner of the north knelt before him, pledged their swords. And Robb Stark, who had been a boy in the morning, felt something cold and heavy settle on his shoulders by nightfall. He did not yet know that the weight would follow him through every field of battle. In every version of the war, the world might spin. That night he walked alone to the Godswood, as his father had done 1,000 times. Grey Wind padded at his heel, breath steaming in the cold. The heart tree's red leaves were edged with frost. Its carved face wept sap that looked almost like clotted blood. Robb knelt in the snow, his hands bare to the freezing air as he laid them on the weirwood's roots. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered, the words misting from his lips. "But I'll learn. I swear it. Only, let him live long enough to see me try." The old gods did not answer, not in any language he knew. The wind shifted through the branches, and Robb felt a strange prickle along his spine, as if the tree were not a thing of bark and sap, but a door, and something vast and patient watched him from beyond. In another world, a boy went away from that tree with a mind full of fear and pride and reckless hunger. In that world, he would keep some promises and break others, and the breaking would bleed his banners dry. But here now, beneath this thin winter sky, the thought that settled in Robb Stark's chest was not of glory. It was of duty and of roads not taken. They rode south like a storm rolling out of the snows. At Moat Cailin, the choke point of the neck, Robb made his first decision that mattered. Theon Greyjoy rode at his side, grinning beneath the striped black and gold of his cloak, the kraken on his breast. "Let me go to Pike," Theon said as they camped within the broken stone towers. Firelight danced in his dark eyes. "Give me a ship and a letter with your seal. My father might bring his longships against the Lannisters if there is plunder to be had. Hit them from the sea while we take them on land. Squeeze them like a crab between two rocks. They'll never dream of it." No, it was tempting. Robb could see the shape of that strategy laid across the map Luwin had spread. Greyjoy longships harrying Lannisport while Northern Horse swept down the Green Fork. Tywin Lannister caught between. A pincer, as Theon said. In some other turn of time, amid weariness and the press of other worries, Robb Stark said yes. This night, he did not answer at once. He looked instead at Theon's easy smile, the hungry way the boy spoke of his father's favor. He thought of Balon Greyjoy's banners burning beneath the walls of Pike, the ravens that had brought word of drowned men and rebellion crushed. His father had ridden in that war. Twice, Ned had told him what Balon was like. "He bent the knee," Robb said slowly. "He swore to my father, and by the old gods and the new." "Would you trust that oath, Theon, if you were me? Or has 10 years in my father's hall made you forget the taste of salt in his words?" Theon's grin faltered. For a moment, he was only a boy, cheeks reddening in the firelight. "I am your man," he said stiffly, "not his. If you don't trust him, trust me." "No, I do," Robb said. "That's why I won't put you back in his hands. You're safer here, where I can see you." Safer. It was a small word, but something in it loosened Theon's shoulders. The sharp retort died on his tongue. The fire crackled between them. "So we leave the Iron Islands to sulk," Great John Umber rumbled when Robb took the problem to his war council. "Good. I've no wish to smell kraken on our wind. Better a wolf's teeth than a squid's arms." Roose Bolton was there as well, pale eyes and pale hands folded on the table. "An untrustworthy ally is worth less than a declared foe," he said in his cool whisper. "The Greyjoys lack discipline. Give them half a chance and they will turn their raids northward. Leave them to their rocks." Robb watched the man as he spoke. Roose's face was still as milk in a bowl. It was hard to shake the feeling that those colorless eyes missed little. "Then we will not send Theon," Robb said. "We will watch the sea and guard White Harbor. If Balon means to break faith, he will find the north ready for him." And the Riverlands?" Caitlin asked, her gaze drawn to the stylized fork of the trident on the map. "Your grandfather holds Riverrun, but Lannisters are closing the noose." "We move," Robb said. "Fast. Tywin is at Harrenhal, fixing to cross the rivers. We'll use the twins and get behind him." "The phrase," muttered Small John Umber. "All knees and spite." Caitlin's mouth tightened. "Lord Walder will open his gates," she said. "He's too craven not to, but he'll want something for it." "Aye? Then we'll give it," Robb said, hearing in his own voice a note of steel that was not there a month ago. Within reason. At the twins, the river wind smelled of mud and old stone. The towers loomed, narrow-eyed and suspicious, and the men on the walls watched the northern host with crossbows in hand, as if the direwolf banners might sprout wings and leap the water. Inside, Walder Frey sat on his high seat surrounded by the ragged abundance of his offspring. His lips pursed in sour amusement as Caitlin named each lord of the north. He was every inch the man she remembered, spite wrapped in old flesh, counting slights like a miser counts coins. He tried, of course. Frey daughters paraded like mares, uncleared throats and pointed innuendos about alliance. He wanted a marriage, a surety, something he could hold up to the rest of the realm and crow that a Stark pup had suckled at the twins. Robb listened, jaw clenched, as his mother did the talking. When Walder pressed harder, however, his watery eyes sliding again and again toward Robb, the young wolf lifted his head. "I will need your bridge, my lord," he said. "And the crossing. I will pay for them in gold and in glory. If you throw in your swords, we'll bleed Lannister on your planks for all the realm to see." Walder snorted. "Glory feeds no mouths." "Then let us speak of hostages rather than wedding beds," Robb said before his mother could. "Send some of your sons with us, to win honor in the field. In return, I will leave you men of my own blood in your halls. A fair exchange and trust." Catelyn glanced sideways at him, startled. She had expected some boyish promise, some hot-headed vow. This was different. Frey's eyes sharpened. "Which men?" "Ser Ryman, Sir Elmar," Robb said, nodding to two freckled youths near the back, who stared in astonishment. "And any others of your sons who wish to ride with my vanguard. In exchange, you shall have Sir Roderick Castle and Hallis Mullen to advise your garrison." Walder's mouth twisted. "Old men, old swords," Robb said. "And they'll have Grey Wind with them." At his name, the direwolf raised his head and bared his teeth, silent and terrible. Walder swallowed. They haggled for hours. In the end, there were betrothals. Arya promised on parchment to a Frey boy 8 years her senior, with the stipulation that the match be revisited when she came of age. Walder muttered but accepted, soothed by the presence of Stark hostages under his roof, and his own sons riding at Robb's side. No vow was made that Robb himself would wed a Frey. Catelyn made certain of that, her fingers pressing warning into her son's sleeve under the table. He felt the temptation to offer it, the quick solution, the binding knot that would secure the bridge. But some colder part of him remembered the weirwood's silent face and the weight of every life on his shoulders. A king's word must not be given lightly, whether he wore a crown yet or no. In some other turn of the wheel, those words were spoken, and a different future staggered forth, red and soaked. Here, the promise never left his tongue. They crossed with banners streaming and drums beating, the hooves of a Northborn army thundering along the twins' pale stone. The old men of House Frey watched from their towers, counting the direwolves and giants and bears as they went, and all their bitter sums came up short. Whispering Wood lived up to its name. The trees were close and thick, their leaves sighing together as dusk bled across the sky. The Lannister camp lay in a shallow vale beyond the river, golden lions shining on every tent. Jaime Lannister's host was lean and restless, scouts and outriders spread wide. It should have been impossible to surprise them. Robb rode at the head of his picked men, armor dullened, cloak turned inside out. Grey Wind stalked ahead, a shadow between the trunks. All around him, northern riders moved in near silence, their horses trained to be as quiet as ghosts. The air smelled of damp earth, leather, and the distant smoke of the Lannister cookfires. He had sent a feint under Roose Bolton to the fords, to draw Tywin's eye. He had prayed the Godswood's gods that Roose would obey the plan, and not his own private counsel. He felt every breath, every heartbeat. Once, on the edge of the trees, his horse stumbled on an exposed root. For a sliver of a heartbeat, the animal's whinny seemed the loudest sound in the world. Men's heads turned in the distant camp. Robb's heart slammed against his ribs. In another turn of the river of time, that stumble became a shriek. A horn sounded too soon. Jaime Lannister woke and drew steel, and the young wolf's charge broke on a prepared wall of red cloaks. In that world, the war bent cruelly. Here, the horse recovered with a snort, and Robb soothed it under his breath. Gloved fingers light on its neck. No horn sounded. The golden lion slept on, smug within his own legend. Night thickened beneath the boughs. "Now," Robb whispered, and spurred forward. They flowed down into the camp like a shadow given teeth. Gray Wind went first, tearing through a cooking fire, scattering embers and men alike. Steel flashed in the firelight, and the quiet was gone in an instant, replaced by screams and the harsh clangor of battle. Robb rode at the point, sword in hand, shouting, "Winterfell," until his throat was raw. His riders smashed through the outer ring of tents, slashing ropes as they went. Canvas collapsed on soldiers still fumbling for their boots, smothering their cries. Jaime Lannister came out of his own tent already armored, sword naked, golden hair bright even in the half-dark. He looked like the song said he did, calm at the heart of chaos, blade moving in smooth, deadly arcs. Men died around him and he seemed almost bored by it. "Stark!" he called when he saw Robb, grinning under the lion of his helm. "Come earn your name, boy." In one world, Robb took the bait in pure hot fury and drove straight at him, carving down the men around the Kingslayer in reckless hunger. Steel rang on steel, sparks flying, until he found himself alone amid a ring of lions, outnumbered and dragged from the saddle. This Robb felt the first surge of rage, and with it the old training in the yard, his father's voice like winter in his ear. "When an enemy wants you angry, stay cold. Bring him down," Robb shouted, not at Jaime, but at the bannerman closest to him. "Loose!" Arrows hissed, dark streaks against the firelight sky. Jaime lifted his shield, snarling, deflecting 1, 2, 3 shafts, but his horse shrieked as a fletched black arrow buried itself in its neck. The animal reared and went over backwards, almost crushing the Kingslayer beneath its weight. Northern riders were on him before he could find his feet. Gray Wind leapt, massive jaws closing on the arm that still clutched a sword. Men wrestled, cursed, shouted. When the chaos cleared, Jaime Lannister was on his knees in the mud, his sword wrenched from his fingers, blood striping his golden hair. Robb reined in a few paces away, chest heaving, Gray Wind's muzzle red up to the eyes. "Yield," Robb said. Jaime laughed, even then the sound raw and incredulous. "To you? To the king in the north?" Great Sean Umber bellowed from behind, drunk on the taste of victory, already half in love with the legend they were writing. Jaime's lip curled. For a heartbeat, Robb thought he might spit in their faces and take a final death instead. But there was calculation there too, behind the bright green eyes. Lannisters did not throw themselves away easily. "I yield," he said at last. The word left his mouth and went spinning out across Westeros like a thrown coin, changing the balance at every table where the war was being played. At River Run, it loosened the siege and saved the heart of the Tully lands. At Harrenhal, Tywin clenched his hand around a wine cup so hard the glass cracked. In King's Landing, Cersei lost a little color and did not quite know why, only that some wind had shifted unfavorably far away. And in the cool darkness beneath the roots of a far northern tree, a boy who was not there watched the paths branch and knot. Bran Stark lay where the crow had brought him in a future that had not yet been born. His broken body was far away, but his eyes were the heart tree's eyes now, white and red and opening onto rivers of time. He saw Robb at Whispering Wood, the gleam of Jaime's hair, the arrow that missed or struck, the horse that stumbled or did not. He saw his brother bleeding out beneath a tree in one gray, pale world, a lion's sword in his throat. He flinched, and the vision slid like water. This time, Gray Wind's jaws closed, and the Kingslayer yielded. Bran shivered, though he had no skin. 1,000 other branches of reality rustled around him, all the ways his brother might die or fail. Most of them ended in cold and white, and the whisper of dead leaves over empty crowns. But this one was different. The God's Wood was not a place for liking or wanting, and yet something in the ancient roots seemed to lean in, attentive, as if keeping this thread from breaking. Bran had not yet learned that he could nudge, ever so slightly. That knowledge would come. For now, he only watched, with the ache of a boy who loved his brother and the terrible understanding of a god who knew what that brother must become if the world were to live. Jaime Lannister in chains was worth more than any hill or castle. Tywin understood that as well as Robb did. The old lion did not rage when the raven came with the news. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. He dismissed the messenger with a flick of long fingers. He stared at the ink on the parchment for a long time, and saw his son kneeling in the mud, saw stark wolves howling over him. He saw the way the river lords and the lesser houses would rally to a boy king called King in the North, now that they could ransom their kin with golden coin instead of useless pleas. He saw, very clearly, a wolf's shadow creeping across the map of the Trident toward his own golden hills. Then he laid the letter down and began to make new calculations. "We rally," he said to Sir Kevan. "We will break them. Boys can lose armies as easily as they win battles. And the stark whelp is both boy and wolf. Wolves don't think of winter until they're starving." Kevan, loyal and solid, nodded. "What of the capital? The Queen writes that your grandson is in need of your presence. Eddard Stark waits for judgment." "Let the imp keep the boy from choking on his crown," Tywin said. "Joffrey will be just as much a fool tomorrow as he is today. Every day that Eddard Stark is alive in King's Landing, he is a hostage too. If the Lannister name still has any meaning for that northern sow, she will not push the matter while her husband still breathes." He paused, considering. "Send word to Lord Walder Frey," he said at last. Quietly. Men like him are often moved by the right offers. Land, titles, perhaps a match or two. A bridge can be turned into a knife very quickly in the right hands. Kevan frowned. The Freys swore to let the Starks cross for passage and vows. Their sons ride with the Stark host. Bow. Then their sons will bring back stories of victory and glory, and Walder's envy will eat him like a sickness, Tywin said. At which point we give that envy a direction. A man like Walder Frey would kill his own blood for place and favor. He'll certainly betray someone else. He looked at the map again. A wolf's head carved from bone sat on the table, marking Robb Stark's last known position. Tywin moved it a fraction, his fingers steady. "He wins his battles," he murmured, almost to himself. Good. The higher he climbs, the harder he will break when he falls. Mai. In Harrenhal's great hall, the wind moaned through broken stone, carrying the ghosts of burned kings. None of them answered. Far to the north of that black ruin, Robb Stark sat in a canvas command tent, lit by flickering lamplight. A map of the Riverlands spread between him and his mother. "He means to draw me," Robb said. "He'll pile raiders into the villages along the Red Fork, force me to chase him on ground he chooses." "And will you?" Catelyn asked. Robb's hand hovered over the carved wolf. He could feel Tywin out there like a cold pressure, an intelligence as old and remorseless as winter. "No," he said, and moved the piece west instead. "Let him burn a few Lannister villages to ash and see how his banners hold. We strike where he is weakest, the Westerlands." "Casterly Rock," whispered Robert Glover. "Bold? Mad," muttered Galbart Glover. "Perfect," boomed Greatjon. "It's what your father would never expect. Go where the enemy thinks you cannot." Catelyn stared at the little lion carved to mark the rock. To march on Casterly Rock was to thrust a sword at the heart of Lannister power. It would force Tywin's hand, pull him back from the Riverlands. But it was risk piled upon risk. Long supply lines. Strange ground. Lords in the Westerlands whose fealty to their lion overlord might yet burn hot. "You have only so many men," she said. "Every march south lengthens the road back to Winterfell, Robb. Winter is coming. The farther from home you are, the more each storm will cost you." "I know," Robb said quietly. "But if we bleed Tywin on the Trident, he retreats to the rock to lick his wounds. As long as it stands, gold will buy him armies forever. We can spend 10 years putting out fires and he will still be rich and strong." "No. And you mean to cut out his heart?" Catelyn said. Robb nodded once. His eyes were the color of cold water, and there was something new in them now. Something his father had never had, or never cared to use. A gambler's edge, but tempered. "Roose," he said, turning. "You'll hold the green fork and shadow Tywin's retreats. I want letters from you every night. Where he moves, how many, what the small folk say. If he breaks away from you, send ravens to me, and to River Run both. I won't have him slipping his leash. Nani, one name na. And if the Lord of the Dreadfort decides his own interests lie elsewhere." His mother's voice was sharp as a steel needle. Robb's jaw tightened. Then the Dreadfort will learn what it means to cross a Stark. For now, he's useful. I'll keep him where I can see the knife. Roose Bolton bowed, the gesture as smooth as his voice. "As you command, my lord." He hesitated just long enough on the last word to remind the tent that no crowns had yet been set on any heads. Not truly. But the men around the table looked to Robb first now, their faces turned toward him in the lamplight, and that was a sort of crown all its own. That night, when the camp was quiet and the last of the songs had died under the mutter of sentries, Robb lay awake on his pallet, staring at the tent ceiling. Gray wind slept by the flap, breathing slow and deep. Outside, horses shifted and snorted. On the edge of sleep, he felt again the press of the weirwood beneath his palms, the strange awareness trickling through his veins. Roads and choices. Each decision he made now hung other futures on it like branches on a tree. He had no words for it, only a sense that something watched. "Keep me honest," he whispered into the dark. "If I start doing this for myself and not for them, for Father and the North, stop me." Whether the gods ever heard, he would never know. But later, when the war for the Rock came down to a single risky choice, that quiet promise would come back to him. Sharper than glory, heavier than pride. The march into the Westerlands was a long knife slid under a lion's ribs. They went fast, lighter than Tywin would have expected, leaving most of their baggage and slower levies at River Run under Brynden Tully's sharp eye. Robb took his horse in the hard core of his northern cavalry, the men who had ridden with him at Whispering Wood, men who had learned the sound of his voice in battle and the rhythm of his hand on the reins. They crossed the Red Fork in a cold dawn mist, where the water smoked in the chill and the stones were slick as lies. Scouts went out ahead in squads of 3, their cloaks mud-brown and green. They moved like ghosts through the Lannister hills, slipping past watchtowers and hamlets. The first warning old Lord Crakehall had that northern wolves were in his land came when Grey Wind howled from the courtyard below his chamber window, and his garrison gate exploded inward under a battering ram. It went like that, again and again. Smaller keeps were taken with minimal bloodshed. Robb offered terms where he could. "Yield your swords and hold your lands in my name rather than Tywin's," he told more than one bewildered Westerlands lord as they knelt in his makeshift councils. "Or keep your lion and share in its fate when we reach the Rock." Most of them looked at the chain of prisoners riding in Robb's train, golden-haired knights disarmed and grim. Jaime Lannister himself never far from Grey Wind's watchful eye, and saw which way the wind was blowing. They bent their knees. Those who did not mostly died. Word flew like startled birds. Tywin's vanguard turned west in ragged haste. His letters to Walder Frey went unanswered, or met with stiff assurances that House Frey was loyal to its current guest, and would await clearer signs of the war's outcome before committing to anything else. Sir Roderick Castle had a hand in that, his blunt honor wrapped in surprised steel. He had seen the way Walder's eyes shone when glory was mentioned, and he wielded his hostages carefully. "Your sons ride with a king now," he told the old man when ravens arrived bearing news of Robb's victories. "If you betray him, their heads will be first on his pikes when he takes the Rock. Leave your knives in their sheaths, my lord. There will be better feasts than this coming." "Nah," Walder grumbled and whined, but fear warred with avarice in him, each cutting away at the other. In half the paths the future might take, fear lost. Blood soaked Walder's floors, and the twins changed their name to something red and cursed. Here, with Stark hostages in his halls and Stark steel at his tables, Walder Frey let the letters from the Lion Lord sit unanswered in a box by his bedside. He would open them later, he told himself, when the winning side was clearer. By the time he felt sure enough to choose, the chance to matter had passed him by. History would remember House Frey as a weather vane, not a dagger. At Casterly Rock, the sea battered itself against black cliffs. The fortress was huge, old as legend, half carved from stone and half grown into it like a lion's skull emerging from a crack. Robb looked up at it from a ridge as the sun went down behind a veil of cloud, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. "Big," muttered Greychon, "but everything that big has a weak place. Tell me you've found one, boy." "Monday." Robb nodded toward the westward sea. "There," he said. "The rocks never feared attack from the water. Their attention's always been on the landward gates." "We've no fleet," objected Galbart Glover. "We can sprout gills." "No," Robb agreed. "But we can use what's already there." A week ago, Manderley ships had slipped down from White Harbor, hugging the western coast, their holds full of northern men who did not mind the reek of salt and fish. They had landed in a hidden cove an hour's march from the rock, in the shadow of an old clogged sea tunnel used by generations of Lannister smugglers. Caitlyn's father had told her of it once, laughing over wine. A foolish anecdote about golden lions who thought they could hide the stink of their crimes from the sea. Robb had listened. He listened to a great many things these days. Now, in the watery half-light before dawn, he and his picked men slithered along slick stone like crabs, the roar of waves filling their ears. The tunnel's ceiling was low in places. They went sidewise through those, armor scraping harshly. The air stank of salt and weed and old secrets. More than once, a foot slipped. Once, a man went down hard. His breath punched out of him, helm scraping rock. Robb reached back, caught his arm, and hauled him up before his curses could become loud enough to carry. Every misstep was a crack into which a different future might have poured. A broken ankle, a shouted warning, a guard on the cliffs looking down by chance at the wrong, or right, moment. But the gods would silent, promise lay on Robb's shoulders like a hand. For now, the rock slept on. They emerged into its belly, an old cavern carved for smugglers' craft, at the base of a stair that corkscrewed upward into the keep. There were guards, of course. The rock was not entirely foolish. But they expected contraband, not a Northman with a direwolf. Grey wind hit the first of them so fast the man didn't have time to shout. The rest went just as quickly, blades in the dark. Upward they went into the castle's core. The stair seemed endless. Robb's legs burned. His hand ached from gripping his sword hilt. He heard his heart in his ears. At the top, a heavy door barred with iron stood between them and the rock's inner corridors. "Greyjohn," he murmured. The Umber Lord grinned, set his shoulder, and heaved. The bar gave with a squeal that sounded like thunder in Robb's head. They burst into a hall where servants were carrying bread and stew to the Lannister garrison. For a long heartbeat, everyone simply stared. Then steel sang, voices rose, pots crashed to the floor. A pot of stew shattered, sending a wave of steaming meat across the rushes. Men slipped on it and fell. Others tripped over them. Robb did not have time to think. His world narrowed to sword and shield, gray wind snarls, the familiar urge to roar his own name so loud it drowned his fear. But beneath it now, there was a deliberate thread. Where he went, who he cut, when he ordered his men to press, and when to fall back. Hold the inner stair. Secure the gatehouse. Get the portcullis down before Tywin's outside garrison understands what has happened. He had studied the rock's plans from an old volume in Maester Luwin's library, the lines of its walls and tunnels etched into his mind as deeply as Winterfell's. He moved through those imagined spaces now, turning them from ink to blood. By midday, the lion banners above Casterly Rock hung limp and torn. New banners rose in their place, gray direwolves snapping in a sea wind on a height that had never known their kind. Robb stood on the battlements, his armor sticky and red, his hair clinging damply to his forehead. Below him, beyond the cliffs, The sea hurled itself at the base of the rock and broke again and again. He felt something in him break and reform as well. "We took it," Greatjon declared, thumping him on the back hard enough to stagger him. "By the old gods, boy, you took the rock." Robb's eyes went to the distant road where dust plumes marked marching columns. Tywin's host would be on them soon. The Manderley banners snapped above the captured harbor. The northern wolf flew where the lion had stood for centuries. "We've shaken the realm," Catelyn said quietly beside him. Her face was pale beneath the streaks of dirt. "Nothing will be the same now." "Good," Robb said, and for an instant he sounded very much like a king. "It was rotten." Kings rose and fell while the rock changed hands. In King's Landing, Joffrey Baratheon took his father's sword and lopped off Lord Eddard Stark's head upon the steps of the Great Sept, because no one stopped him in time. In some branches of the world's tree, that act undid everything else. The North went mad with grief and rage, and Robb's war became a crusade that devoured his own lands as thoroughly as it did the South's. Here, when the Raven came with the news, and it did, late and bloody, carrying a scrap of parchment with a single careless line written in a cramped hand, Robb took the piece of vellum very gently, read it once, and then folded it. He did not shout. He did not break anything. His face went very still in the lamplight. Catelyn made a sound as though something inside her had cracked. He was a prisoner," she whispered. "He had yielded, they promised." "Joffrey Baratheon is no king," Robb said, his voice flat and distant. "He's a monster in a crown. And the men who allowed him to do this," he drew a breath, "they'll answer for it." He looked out over Casterly Rock's courtyard, where northern men were drilling under Stark and Umber eyes. In the shadows of the gatehouse, Jaime Lannister watched with his arms manacled, his expression difficult to read. "Bring him," Robb said. They chained the Kingslayer to a pillar in the rock's great hall. It stank of old smoke and fresh blood. The lion statues stared sightlessly down. Jaime stood straight, despite the iron links binding his wrists. "You should have kept him alive," he said when Robb read the Raven's message aloud. "Alive, he's leverage. Dead, he's only meat." "You speak of my father," Robb said. "I speak of hostages and crowns." Jaime's green eyes were clear. "My sister always did have a taste for spectacle. I warned her it was unwise." "You warned her it was unwise to murder an honest man?" Jaime laughed once harshly. "That too, if you like." Robb studied him. "Joffrey wears the crown now because your sister willed it so," he said slowly. "But he has no right to it. You know that. You know better than anyone that Robert's trueborn children are scarce." "Nay, no was a guy, no shall, but tea." A flicker in Jaime's gaze. It was gone quickly, but not quickly enough. "Say the words," Robb said. "Swear that Joffrey is no true king, that my sister's tormentors sit illegitimately on the Iron Throne." "And why would I do that?" Jaime asked lightly. "Out of love for your father? We didn't part on the best of terms, as I recall." "Because if you don't, your sister will keep swinging swords at my family's necks for as long as she draws breath," Robb said. "And she's already killed the one man in the realm who might have made peace between us." He stepped closer, until the point of his sword could have touched Jaime's throat if he'd wished. "There will be a reckoning," Robb said softly, so only the Kingslayer and the nearest guards could hear. "I'm going to bring down the men who thought honor was a weakness they could drown in their wine. But when that's done, there will still be a realm full of small folk who'll need feeding, castles that need keeping, walls that need manning when the snows come. I don't just want to break things, Lord Jaime. I want to build something that isn't made of lies." "Not to go." Something flickered again in Jaime's eyes. Memory, perhaps, of a boy who had once dreamed of being Arthur Dayne reborn, not a Kingslayer with a dirty secret. Or maybe Robb Stark only imagined it. "You think you're different from the rest of us," Jaime said. "You're not. Give it time. The first head you take because it makes a convenient point, the first promise you break because it's easier. It all tastes the same in the end. Maybe, Robb said. "But I'll try. That's more than most kings bother with." "No, Dima." He stepped back. "For now, you live. Remember why." Jamie's smile, when it came, was slow and sharp. "Oh, I will." Bran saw that hall too, looking out through carved stone lion's eyes as if they were weirwood faces. The world's tree that was his seat of power had roots that went far beneath Casterly Rock now, groping along old seams of magic and memory. He watched his brother facing the Kingslayer and felt again the multiplicity of paths. In one, Robb gave in to his anger and had Jamie's head struck off and mounted on a spike above the rock's gate. It felt good in that future, for a little while. The small folk cheered. Lords of the North drank to the sight. In that world, Cersei burned the city rather than surrender it. Wildfire rolled over the Blackwater and up the hill to the Red Keep. In that world, there were no kings and no Lannisters left in King's Landing. Only green fire and ash blowing on a wind that carried the laughter of something old and cold and dead from beyond the wall. Bran pulled away from that branch with something like a cramped breath. The heart of the tree ached. When he turned his sight back to the hall where Robb stood, the sword did not move. "Keep me honest," his brother had said to the gods. Bran had not yet learned to speak to him in dreams. Not clearly, but he could listen. He could choose a little, which visions settled heavy on Robb's sleeping mind. The ones where honor led to ruin, the ones where mercy turned into a knife in the dark, the ones where suspicion curdled into tyranny. He let those wash over his brother often. Robb slept badly, but he woke thinking. That was enough. The South did not stand still while the North devoured the West. At Storm's End, Stannis Baratheon brooded atop his ancient walls, jaw clenched, watching a red woman's shadow dance in candlelight. In some fractures of the world, Renly still lived, his peach-scented banners flapping above a laughing host. In others, the shadow baby slid under his tent flaps and cut him from crown to throat. In this one, Renly's pride got the better of him a day earlier than it otherwise might have, and he agreed to meet his brother face to face without his full guard. Stannis spoke hard truths there on the grass, Davos Seaworth at his shoulder, and whether it was the particular turn of phrase or the way the wind blew banners that day, something in Renly heard it differently. "Robert is dead," Stannis said. "The gods saw fit to make him king, no matter what we thought of it, and we followed. They saw fit to make me next. That is how it works. A house without a head is easy prey, Renly. Do you want lions and wolves picking at the bones while you hand around peaches? No, yeah." Renly had laughed as expected, but then his eyes went to the distant line of smoke that marked Lannister burning in the Riverlands, to the ravens that had arrived telling of a boy they were calling king in the north. For a heartbeat longer than fate had once allowed, he hesitated. "Fine," he said at last. "You can have the bloody thing. I never much liked sitting still anyway. I'll be your hand. Someone has to stop you burning the whole court down because someone coughed too loudly." "No day." Melisandre narrowed her red eyes. Stannis' jaw tightened further, then eased a fraction. He nodded once. Renly lived. That single spared life rippled outward. With the combined strength of all Stormland and Reach bannermen who had flocked to Renly's bright banners, Stannis marched on King's Landing. The wildfire in the Blackwater burned bright and green under the walls, but the fleets from the Stormlands were more numerous and better led. Without the relief of Tywin's host, which had been bled and turned aside by warriors in the Riverlands and checks near Harrenhal, the city ran out of arrows and courage. The Lion Gate opened. The gold cloaks wavered, then turned their cloaks for whoever would feed them. Stannis' banners, stag-crowned and fiery heart both, flew above the city. Joffrey Baratheon died on his knees in the throne room with his crown at his feet, the middle of three red-faced, screaming children Stannis would never recognize as anything but bastards of incest. Cersei watched from the foot of the throne, her hand tight on Tywin's shoulder, and knew by the expression in Stannis' pale eyes that tears would buy her nothing. Davos Seaworth watched too, grim, feeling something old and weary in his chest crack and give way like thin ice under too much weight. He thought of Ned Stark, a man he had never met, and whether this was justice or merely another turn of the wheel pretending at righteousness. Justice, Melisandre whispered to him as the headsman raised his sword. The Lord of Lights will made manifest. If you say so, m'lady, Davos murmured, and thought of his sons out on ships, and the way the wildfire's green glare had looked on the faces of the drowned. When word of King's Landing's fall reached Casterly Rock, Robb listened at a war council thick with distrust. The Great John wanted to ride south at once, take advantage of the city's distraction to storm the capital and hang the stag as well as the lion. Catelyn counseled caution, her heart pulled in two directions. The same Stannis who had taken her husband's head had now avenged his murder. Let the Southerners gnaw at each other, Galbart Glover advised. We have what we need. The rock is ours. The Riverlands are nearly free. Call your banners home, Robb. Be king in the north and let the south stew. Roose Bolton's mild voice slid into the conversation. If you trust Stannis Baratheon to stop at the neck, do so, he said. If you don't, you'd best have some say in what kind of king he'll be. Wolves and stags both know how to cross rivers. Robb listened. He always listened. But when the argument circled back to him, he said, I will not arrear the north to another southern king. Not after what they did to father. Not after what Joffrey did. You mean to claim the crown? Catelyn asked, quiet. I mean to keep it, Robb said. The men already call me king in the north. We'll make it more than a battle cry. He did it at River Run, in the castle yard, with the River Lords arrayed alongside his own bannermen. It was a rough ceremony, by southern standards. No septon, no high septon, only a circle of men who had bled together. Great John Umber led the cry, dropping to one knee and thumping his sword on the ground. Here sits the only man I'll call king, he roared. The king in the north. Voices took it up, a ragged thunder. Men knelt, swords went up and down. Robb felt the sound slam into his chest like a physical thing. He knelt too, not to them, but at the feet of the heart tree in River Run's small godswood later, with only his mother and Grey Wind as witness. He pressed his brow to the carved grooves of the weirwood and whispered, This is what they want of me. Then show me how not to lose them all. No. The heart tree said nothing the way the old gods always did, but leaves drifted down around him, red as king's blood and quiet. Bran watched that too, across distance and time, and felt a sense of rightness hum through the roots. The North had a king who prayed, at least. It would help. The Iron Islands did rise, as everyone had expected they might. Balon Greyjoy sent his longships east, ironborn bellowing of the old way. But this time they did not find a north lying undefended and unsuspecting in their wake. Robb had left orders. Manderly fleets patrolled the coasts. Moat Cailin was garrisoned heavily, reed and stone both. When the Ironborn struck at Deepwood Moat and Torrhen Square, they found levies already called and walls ready. They took some prizes, burned some villages. That was the way of any raid, but they did not hold. Worse for them, Theon Greyjoy was not by Balon's side for the old man to use as he pleased. He was at Robb's war council table, his easy grin sharpened by Rossart's ink lines on maps. I'll hit where you're weakest, Theon said of his father, voice clipped now in a way Robb hadn't heard before. He cares more about the taking than the holding. If you can force him to stand and fight instead of flitting away like a gull, you can break him. You're sure? Robb asked. Theon's jaw tightened. I know my father. He'll never treat with you as an equal. He'll take what he can with a knife in the dark, then laugh when you try to cut a deal with him. The only language he understands is fire. Give it to him. So Robb did. He sent men who knew ships. Manderless and Volantine sell sails bought with Lannister gold he now controlled. He gave them northern soldiers who'd already fought lions and wolves and lived, and told them to bring back the Greyjoy fleet in pieces. On the deck of a burning longship in Lordsport Harbor, as the smoke from his tower choked the sky, Balon Greyjoy stood with a spear in his hand and saw the end of his rebellion written in flame. You did this, he said to the vision of his son he imagined on the enemy's decks, green-cloaked among gray. "You turned Kraken into wolf." Then, a northern arrow struck him in the throat, and he toppled wordlessly into the sea. The waves took him. The Ironborn wailed and howled and drowned, and the Iron Islands learned again that the old way had no defense against a world that had grown tired of its reavings. When word reached Casterly Rock that the Kraken was broken and his daughter Asha held hostage in Winterfell's Great Hall, Theon Greyjoy went quiet and stayed that way for 3 days. On the 4th, he came to Robb. "If you mean to execute her, tell me now," he said. "I'll drink myself insensible and not wake until it's done." Robb shook his head. "I mean to keep her alive," he said. "Balon's dead. The Iron Islands need a ruler. Asha's as likely as any to keep them from more foolishness, if she'll bend the knee and promise to keep her ships out of northern waters." "She might," Theon said slowly. "If you convince her you don't hate her for existing." "I don't," Robb said. "She didn't choose her father." He thought of Joffrey and shivered. "In some other world you did send me back to him," Theon said as if to himself. "Sometimes I dream it. I wake up with my hands bloody and I don't know why." "No." Robb did not see Bran watching in that moment, but Bran did. Perched in the heart of some half-remembered weirwood on the western shore, the Green Seer felt the way certain futures brushed against his brother's life like chill drafts under a door. In most of those futures, Theon Greyjoy's path led through darkness, betrayal, and the screaming darkness of Ramsay Snow's dungeons. In this one, the line was not entirely clean. Not every crime was avoided, not every wound unmade. The North and the Iron Islands had decades of blood between them. But the worst of it, the flayed prince, the burning of Winterfell, the fall of the Stark's house to a bastard's cruelty, those were shadows now, not certainties. The tree sighed, leaves stirring. The world's branches creaked under the weight of so many might-have-beens. But the path the old gods leaned upon, ever so slightly, held. Robb Stark's northern armies won every battle they fought, not only with swords and arrows, but with the less visible wars of choice and consequence. He stayed true where he might have broken. He mistrusted where blind trust would have killed him. And he forgave where vengeance would have planted seeds of rot. Years later, men would point to a map of Westeros and say, "Here, this is where everything changed." Some pointed to Casterly Rock, with its stark gray banners flying where lions once roared. Some to King's Landing, where Stannis Baratheon, grimmer now, and tempered by years at court with Renly and Marjorie Tyrell, and an unforgiving northern example to measure himself against, had reshaped the Iron Throne's rule, cutting away much of its cruelest indulgences. Others pointed north of the neck to a line drawn thick and dark, marking the border of a kingdom reborn. The North stood separate now, a realm in its own right, united with the Trident and much of the Westerlands under a crown of ice and river water. The Pact of the Trident, inked in a great hall in Riverrun where once only songs of lost glories had echoed, had set it down. The king in the north and the king on the Iron Throne were equals in law, bound by mutual defense against external threat, trade agreements, and a promise that no army of one would cross the other's lands without cause and consent. It was a messy, imperfect peace, full of clauses and contested rights. But it was peace, and it held. Robb Stark walked the walls of Winterfell again, years after he had left them, Grey Wind's descendants pacing beside him. He was older now, the boyishness scoured from his face by wind and war. A white streak ran through his hair at one temple, thanks to an old wound from a crossbow bolt at the siege of the Golden Tooth. Children played in the yard below, their shouts bright in the thin northern air. Sansa sat on a bench near the gatehouse, a parchment on her lap. Her fingers moved quickly, marking lines and notes. "Another letter from Lady Margaery?" Robb asked with a half-smile as he approached. "And from the Queen," Sansa said. Stannis' queen. Renly's beauty and charm had gone elsewhere. But the Baratheon king had taken a bride as politics demanded. The Reach and the Stormlands had to be bound somehow. Marjorie had married Garland instead, to Sansa's quiet relief. "Anything interesting?" Robb asked. "They're wanted in King's Landing, a new festival, a tournament in honor of the peace." Sansa's eyes flicked up to his. "They would be pleased if the king in the north attended." "They always are pleased if I put my head where someone can swing at it," Robb said wryly. "No doubt there would be wine and song and 100 opportunities for some foolish cousin of Cersei's to accidentally trip and stab me." Sansa's mouth tugged at the corner. She had grown into herself these past years. The sharp, skittish fear that had once driven her had softened into something more deliberate. She had walked the gardens of King's Landing with monsters and seen them fall. She had survived the capital's hunger and riot and first remodeled court. Then she had come home, and the first time she had seen snow on Winterfell's walls again, she had knelt and pressed her hands into it until her fingers went numb. "Not all of them hate you," she said. "Some of them are just afraid. You broke things they thought were unbreakable." "Good," Robb said. Then, after a moment, softer, "I'll consider it. The realm needs to see their kings together sometimes, if only to remember that we share enemies worse than each other." "Hey." Sansa's eyes went to the far north, where the sky had taken on a strange quality in recent years. Colder somehow, even when the air did not bite as hard as it once had. "Jon writes that there are wildlings fleeing south in greater numbers," she said. "More every season. He says there are things in the wood that even the old hands are afraid of. Rattleshirt's men won't go out alone anymore. The giants speak of dreams they've not had since they came down from the Frost Fangs." Robb's jaw tightened. "I know." He had ravens from the wall stacked on his desk like drifted snow. Jon Snow, Lord Commander Snow now. In this world where Stannis had needed a trusted ally on the wall, more than a pawn in the north. Wrote in a precise hand about deserted villages, about whites found wandering near Eastwatch, about a cold that sank into bone and did not easily leave. "Stannis sends fewer men than he promises," Robb said. "He has his own troubles. Bankers from Bravos, lords who grumble, the Dornish forever prickling over old wrongs. I can't rely on him. The North will have to answer this first." "You always knew it would come to us," Sansa said quietly. "Father used to say so." "Yes." Robb looked up at the sky. The light had a flatness to it that reminded him uncomfortably of the inside of a weirwood's eyes. "I always knew." In the Godswood, the Hearttree's face watched him with the same carved sorrow it always had. But Bran Stark, somewhere far beyond the curtain of years and bark, watched too. He had traveled further than any man before him in the Greenseer's seat. He had seen the children's fires dying. He had watched the first others rise from the rites men had half forgotten they performed. He had seen 1,000 tomorrows in which winter never ended because there was no one left to mark its passing. In almost all of them, his brother Robb died long before the last snows fell, hedged in by Frey knives, betrayed by northern cruelty, or ground to dust between lion and stag. In those futures, the North broke apart. The wall fell to quarrels long before ice forced it down, and the dead poured through a scattered, leaderless realm. He had tugged. He had whispered into dreams. He had shown Robb visions of villages buried in white, of stark bones lying unburied in drifts while blue eyes watched from the dark. He had pushed gently as a finger on a scale, and now here they were at last, at the branch where all those nudges had led. A world in which Robb Stark stood with a crown on his head, an army at his back, and the will to see that his father's old words were not just a family phrase, but a sentence for the whole world. "Winter is coming. Will he win?" asked a woman's voice beside Bran in the timeless dark beneath the tree. Leaf, old and small and ageless, peered up at him with eyes full of ancient sadness. "He wins every battle," Bran said, looking down at his brother on the wall where he would soon ride to meet Jon. "That doesn't mean he wins the war. In the South, their wars were always for chairs and stones," Leaf said. "For names on songs. This is not that kind of war." "I know," Bran said. He knows too now. He watched Robb ride from Winterfell with banners snapping, the dire wolf of House Stark leading a river of men. Even now, old habits clung to them. The songs the men sang were full of lions brought low, krakens chained, old glories avenged. But as the miles passed under their horses' hooves and the wind grew sharper, those songs changed. They sang less of who they had defeated and more of what they meant to defend. They sang of the wall and the long night, and a pack that would not break. At the Fist of the First Men, Robb Stark saw his first other. The wildlings Jon had warned of were already gone, driven further south or scattered. The blue-eyed dead they left in their wake were not. The battle in the frozen pre-dawn was unlike any Robb had fought before. Steel shattered on contact with white skin. Men who died rose again with eyes like shard ice. He lost men there, many of them. For the first time in his life, Robb's northern armies did not emerge from a field with banners, unbowed and losses that seemed a fair price. But he did not break. He learned. Dragonglass from caches under the snow. The strange, fierce loyalty of fierce wildling clans who would fight for any side that offered them a chance to live. Jon's weary, steady voice at his shoulder, explaining how the dead moved, where they could be lured, how fire could be made from oil and pitch even when the world seemed nothing but frozen stone. They held the fist. When the sun rose, weak and pale, the snowfield around them was piled with true dead, and broken others who melted like hoarfrost where dragonglass had shattered them. "Not unbeatable then," Greatjon said hoarsely, looking at a shattered other blade sizzling where it lay. Robb's face was gray with exhaustion. "Everything in this world breaks," he said. "The trick is being the last thing standing." He wrote to Stannis that night, and to Doran Martell, and to the Tyrells in Highgarden. His ravens carried not demands but news. Men think differently when they face extinction. The letters were full of details, of truths too terrible to disbelieve for long. Some mocked him at first. Songs were written in the capital about Robb the Snow-Scared, about northern tales of monsters used to mask ambition. But then the winter grew deeper, and ships began to come into Old Town from the far north with crews whose eyes had seen things their tongues could not soften into stories. In those other branches of reality, where Robb's bones lay beneath the rubble of some hall or on a tower floor, washed clean of his blood, those warnings came late or not at all. The men of the South quarreled and feasted and schemed while the cold crept down on them. Here, when winter came for them, they were not united. Not truly, not in any way a poet would have thought worthy of a song. But they were not entirely sundered either. There were oaths, inked and blood-sworn between North and South now. There was habit, shared campaigns, grudges, and respect both. There was a king in the North that other kings could treat with, not dismiss as a distant nuisance. The dead did not care about such things. They cared only that there were warm bodies to fill with cold. Robb met them, as he had met every other enemy, with his sword in his mind, and with the knowledge that every choice he made now hung on 1,000 invisible branches of might have been. He remembered his father's quiet strength, his mother's stubborn love. He remembered a boy kneeling at a heart tree, asking to be kept honest. He remembered 1,000 fallen men, Frey and Lannister, and Stark and Greyjoy, and Umber and Manderly, all of the lives his wars had spent to get him to this place. He thought, as he stood on the wall beside Jon Snow and felt the old stones tremble with the drum of dead hands below, that if he failed here, if the wall fell and winter swept down over all their crowns and songs and banners, then every battle he had ever won would have been meaningless. "I'm scared," he said quietly, to Jon. Jon's breath smoked in the freezing air. "Good," he said. "So am I. Men who aren't scared of this should be leading anyone." They looked out together over the white waste where the dead army moved, black against the snow. "Do you ever think," Jon asked after a while, "about what might have happened if you'd done things differently? If you'd married Frey or sent Theon home or any of it?" Robb's mouth twisted. "All the time. Sometimes I dream it. Oh, in some of them we still win battles. But it's always wrong. Off, like a song where someone's hitting the wrong notes. And in those dreams, John said, do we still come to this wall? Robb shook his head. No, he said softly. In most of them, we never get this far at all. He did not know why he felt so certain. Somewhere far away, and very near, beneath the roots of an old tree, Bran Stark closed his eyes. Then I suppose we better make this count, John said. They did. The battle for the wall was not clean, and it was not pretty. Songs later would make it so, because singers had little use for the long, slogging horror of a night that would not end. They would write of Robb Stark roaring atop the wall like some old god of winter, Grey Wind's kin at his side, his sword shining with stolen frostfire as he cut down and other lore. They would speak of Jon's stand in the shadow of the gate, of wildlings and black brothers fighting back to back, of giant bones and shattered ice. They would leave out the men who broke and ran, and had to be dragged back by their commanders. They would leave out the moments when Robb almost faltered, when he saw a boy from White Harbor go down under a tangle of dead hands and wanted to scream. They would leave out the way the world had narrowed to this place, because a boy had once knelt at a tree and asked the gods to keep him honest. In the end, what mattered was that the wall still stood when the sun rose and the last of the others retreated into a dawn that stung their dwindling magic. The dead that lay before the gates did not rise again. Not forever, Bran murmured, watching from a place no eye could see. Nothing's forever. No, Leaf agreed. But long enough, perhaps. Long enough for men to be men, instead of shadows. Long enough for children to grow up in a world where the tales of the long night were stories again, instead of warnings. Long enough for the realms of men to learn that crowns were not the only battles worth fighting. In the yard of Winterfell, some years after that great night, children played at war with sticks. One boy tied a strip of old fur around his shoulders and declared himself the king in the north. Another snatched a broken helm from the ground and proclaimed he was the king on the Iron Throne. They shouted and laughed and swung at each other until a girl smaller than either of them stepped between and knocked both their sticks aside with a blow so quick they never saw it coming. "Idiot kings," she said, grinning, and ran when they gave chase. On the wall above, Robb watched with Arya at his side, feeling the ache in his old scars and the weight of the years. The realm he had helped shape was far from perfect. There were still lords who abused their power, still small folk who starved in bad harvests, still crimes and cruelties that no king could stop with a sword. But there was a north that answered to a Stark again, and a south that thought twice before calling her people's lives cheap. There was a wall still standing, and peace, uneasy, imperfect peace, between men who had once only known each other as enemies. He had won every battle that mattered, across all the lines of time that had tried to break him. In doing so, he had given the Seven Kingdoms something they had not had in living memory: a future. In the rustle of the Godswood's leaves, beneath a sky no longer quite so threateningly white, the old gods and the new alike listened to the laughter of children, and if such things could be said of them, were content. Snow fell in the Godswood in thin, drifting veils, softer than the hard blizzards Robb remembered from his youth. The worst of winter had blown itself out. What came now was the kinder echo of a storm that had nearly swallowed the world. Robb stood beneath the heart tree, his gloved hand resting on the rough, cold bark. The carved face's red eyes stared past him, as they always did, into some distance only the gods could see. "You look older every time I blink," Arya said from behind him. He turned. She lounged along the low stone of the pool's edge, boots muddy, hair tied back with a strip of leather. Needle hung at her hip, plain and sure. There were faint, pale scars on her face now, thin as spider silk. From a dozen fights in shadows the minstrels would never sing of. "You weren't looking," he said. "You were down in White Harbor, pretending to be a smuggler." She grinned, unrepentant. They never expected a girl to be carrying messages, least of all one who looks like she'd steal their apples and run. Davos sends his regards, by the way. Does he? Robb smiled. I'm glad. It's easier to trust a man who's seen the worst of kings and still believes the realm can be better. Now, that's why he likes you, Arya said, tilting her head. You're stubborn enough to try. He didn't answer at once. The godswood was quiet. Even the winds seemed to pause around the heart tree, listening. When we rode south the first time, I thought winning a battle meant riding the field, banners flying, the enemy running, he said at last. Now I know better. Sometimes it's keeping grain stores full through 3 bad harvests. Sometimes it's telling a lord no when he wants gallows instead of judgment. No. Arya flicked a pebble at the pool. Ripples spread in concentric circles, distorting the reflection of red leaves and gray sky. And sometimes, she said, it's dragons. Robb looked at her sharply. You heard, she said. You always do. Eventually. Sailors in White Harbor's taverns can't keep their mouths shut. A city burned in Slaver's Bay. Old masters crucified by the road. 3 shadows in the sky that breathed fire. They say her name is Daenerys Stormborn. They say she's the last Targaryen. Nanu. Ka. The last, Robb repeated. Until someone else remembers an old bastardy or a cousin 3 times removed. She has dragons, Arya said. That's harder to fake. Robb's fingers tightened on the bark. For a moment, the smell of pine and cold water vanished. He smelled instead char and ash, and the memory of King's Landing's wildfire from the letters Davos had sent describing the battle for the city. Stannis writes nothing of her in his last Ravens, Robb said. If he's heard of her, he keeps his silence. He'll have heard, Arya said. He has enough eyes in Bravos and Pentos. Maybe he thinks ignoring her will make her go away. Things like that don't go away, Robb murmured. They come west. Arya shrugged one shoulder, easy and dangerous. If she does, at least it'll be interesting. Far away, the girl in question stood on a balcony in Marine and watched smoke rise from the ships in the bay. The last of the Master's fleet burned on a sea-stained orange by evening. The smoke made a dark mountain on the horizon. Behind her, the city murmured and clattered and shouted, free men and women arguing over market stalls, children racing in the streets, old grudges trying to find new shapes now that the chains that once bound them had been melted down. Daenerys Targaryen leaned her forearms on the warm stone of the balcony rail and tried to see beyond the smoke across the narrow sea. To a land she had never touched, and yet could trace as clearly as the lines in the palm of her hand. Still thinking, Jorah Mormont asked from the doorway. His beard had more gray in it now. His shoulders bore the invisible weight of all the battles they had fought. I always am, she said without turning. Isn't that what queens are for? Thinking too much? He came to stand beside her. Some of them would say queens are for being looked at and obeyed, he said. Wearing crowns, sitting thrones, and losing their heads, Daenerys said, her mouth tightening. She had never seen Eddard Stark with her own eyes, but she had read of him in a letter from Selmy, who sat in quiet attendance in a chair against the balcony wall. The old knight had been slower to speak of that day than of most. His honor had been bruised by it too deeply. When she finally wrung the story from him, it had not been as a tale of courtly treachery, but as an old man's confession. They killed him for telling the truth, she said, for saying what he knew of my brother's children. And of your father, Barristan Selmy said quietly. And of my father. Daenerys closed her eyes. She had dreamed of Westeros as a child as a place stolen from her by usurpers, a land that had belonged to her blood since dragons first cast their shadows over the narrow seas. Rhaegar on his silvered armor, her father on the Iron Throne, visories with his temper and his smile. It had been simple then. They were wronged, and she was right. And one day the wheel would turn. Now she knew more. She knew of wildfire under King's Landing, of a madman's plan to burn a city rather than lose it. She knew of Tywin's sack, of Elia Martell's blood on the walls. She knew of Eddard Stark's quiet refusal to accept that old horror as a foundation for new rule. The realm had not only been stolen from her family, it had been saved from them. "I used to think my choice would be simple," she said, opening her eyes. "Sail west, take back what was stolen, burn whoever stood in the way. And now?" Jorah asked. "Now there is a king on that throne who is not entirely monstrous." Her lips quirked. "Stannis Baratheon. Stern, unforgiving, rigid as shield iron, but not cruel for sport. He kicked Cersei Lannister's chair out from under her and had Joffrey's head for murdering a man whose only crime was telling the truth. The small folk in Flea Bottom call him the Hard King. Some of them say it with a kind of weary relief. That's not all," Barristan said. Age had carved deep lines around his eyes, but they were steady. "There is a king in the north now, as well. Robb Stark. He broke the lion in at Whispering Wood and took Casterly Rock while Tywin's back was turned. The stories say he has never lost a battle." "Stories always say that," Daenerys said, "until someone does." "They say more," Selmy persisted. "They say he took no pleasure in killing his enemy's children, that he spared Jaime Lannister when his own father's blood was still wet in King's Landing, keeping him as hostage instead of sending his head south in vengeance. They say he sent grain to the Stormlands during the worst winter, when their fields failed and their own king did not have enough to feed them all." Daenerys had heard those stories long before Barristan spoke them. They were whispered in the markets of Meereen by sailors who came from Volantis and Pentos, from the Free Cities and further. They spoke of a Wolf King who had made a realm within a realm, of a northern army that moved like a tide and left stability instead of ashes. "This is my father's kingdom," she said, "but it is also theirs now. They bled for it. They changed it. If I cross the narrow sea with my dragons, I will be doing more than reclaiming a stolen crown. I will be breaking world that has finally learned, a little, not to eat itself entirely. None. And yet you are Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen," Jorah said softly. "You ended slavery here. You broke chains in 3 cities. Would you deny Westeros the same chance under your hand?" Daenerys looked out across the bay, past the smoke, and tried to imagine it. Dragons wheeling over King's Landing, shadow on the Red Keep, street children in Flea Bottom watching the sky with both awe and terror. Herself on the Iron Throne, holding court with Stannis Baratheon either exiled or dead, Robb Stark's banner pulled down from the walls of Winterfell. In some versions of that vision, power shone bright, righteous, and strong. In others, it was another horror in a long line of horrors. "I won't be my father," she said, "and I won't be Viserys. If I go, I will not be a firestorm. I will be a storm that clears the sky, or I won't go at all." Selmy's eyes softened, just a little. "Your Grace," he said. "That is what I hoped you would say." In the roots beneath the Isle of Faces, the World Tree shivered. Bran Stark sat cross-legged in the darkness, eyes white and red and full of reflections no lantern could hold. When he spread his awareness over the world, it felt like running his hand over a tapestry that had been patched and repatched, threads of different colors blasted together. Here a wolf's head was stitched where once a lion had been. There the bright thread of a dragon glowed far away. He had watched Daenerys grow, though she did not know it. He had seen her walk barefoot into a pyre and emerge with 3 dragons clinging to her shoulders. He had seen the masters of Astapor die along their own Hiskari roads. He had watched, with a strange mixture of pity and fear, as she tried to build something new atop columns made from old bones. Now he watched her looking west. "If she comes," he said aloud, though there was no one to hear but roots and whispers, "she will change everything." "Yes," Leaf murmured from the half-dark. She perched like a bird on one of the roots, her long fingers curled around the pale wood. "But everything is always changing. The question is whether men's changes help or hinder what lies beneath. What lies beneath? Bran asked. Life, Leaf said. Death, the long memory of the world. The way snow falls differently after a great fire. The way a river turns when someone builds a dam. You were not the first to move in the green site, Brandon Stark. But you are the first to ask whether you should. Bran looked back into the pool of his vision. He saw Robb in the Godswood, hand on the heart tree. He saw Jon on the wall, his hair streaked with frost, talking quietly with Tormund Giantsbane, and a dark-eyed woman from the Thens about how to keep children on both sides of the old line from killing each other out of habit. He saw Stannis in the Red Keep Solar, fingers stained with ink, reading letter after letter from lords who wanted favors they were not owed, from bankers who wanted debt that could not be paid, from Dorne complaining of a murdered princess 30 years in her grave. Renly sat nearby, talking at him over a plate of olives, trying to coax a smile. He saw Daenerys on her balcony, dragons circling above her like living storms. He saw, just briefly, other versions. A city blackened to ash under the shadow of Wing. A northern king charred on a battlefield for refusing to bend. A throne of swords melted into a puddle of glowing slag. So many ways for it to break, Bran whispered. So you hold it together, Leaf said. Is that what you think you are doing? What else can I do? Bran asked. I've seen worlds where he dies, you know, Robb. It always goes worse. Every time. Not for you, Leaf said softly. In those worlds, you never have to decide how much you're allowed to change. Bran flinched as if struck. I don't do it for me. No, Leaf agreed. You do it for them, for your pack. That is your strength. It is also the thing that could undo you. She tilted her head. Will you pull dragon's wings? Will you tilt time so that Daenerys Stormborn never comes west? Bran looked at the Dragon Queen again. Long silver hair lifted in the warm Marinian's breeze. The dragons played above, swooping and snapping at each other, fire flickering around their teeth. No, he said. She has to come. The world will need her. Hey. Leaf's eyes gleamed. And your brother? Bran swallowed. He has to be ready. The raven from King's Landing arrived on a soft spring morning when the crocuses were just pushing through the last crust of snow. Robb broke the wax in the council chamber with Sansa Arya, Davos, Lord Manderly, and Great Jon Umber, all watching. The seal was the crowned stag and flaming heart, Stannis' hand or Melisandre's, depending on who you asked. The letter itself, however, was written in a hand Robb did not recognize, precise, with little flourishes, the signature flowing. Queen Arianne Martell, he thought as he read. Stannis had needed a wife acceptable to Dorne as well as the rest of the realm. Doran Martell had needed a partner strong enough to keep the lions in check. The match had been signed at Sunspear, the feast sheet said, under an unforgiving sun. The Iron Bank presses, Robb read aloud after the proper greetings. The Stormlands and the Crownlands are rebuilding slowly after winter, and the Reach complains of wolves eating into their grain. There are rumors from Bravos and Pentos of a Targaryen queen in Slaver's Bay who has ended the old trade there. My lord husband bids me write to you, to ask what you hear of these things in the north, and to invite you to King's Landing for a council of kings. The realm has need of such unity as we can muster. No, a council of kings, Great Jon snorted. How many of us are there now? You, Stannis, the dragon's girl if she decides she wants in, whoever the Ironborn shout for next week. And the Dornish have their own ideas, Manderly said, his chins quivering thoughtfully. Queen Arianne, is it? I never thought to see the day. Sansa's eyes flicked up from the parchment. She writes herself, not merely affixing her name beneath Stannis, she said. That speaks to something. She was raised as Doran's heir, Davos said. In all but name, she knows how to wield a quill as well as a spear. Robb considered the letter's polite phrases again. Buried between the lines, he could feel Arianna's testing fingers, probing for weakness, for friendship, for a sense of what sort of man this king in the north was. Proud, pliable, hungry, content. You can't go, Arya said abruptly. King's Landing eats Starks. It took Father's head. It won't get yours. Robb looked at her. She had seen the worst of that city, hinted at it only in pieces. He knew enough to understand that some nights she still woke with breath coming fast, hand already on needle before she remembered she was home. It's different now, Sansa said, though her voice was not entirely certain. The Lannisters are not in charge. Cersei and Tommen are in exile in Casterly Rock, under your own watch. Stannis is harsh, but not cruel. Renly is there, and Sir Davos says he has the love of the commons. None, good not. Walls and crowds and knives, Arya said. Doesn't matter who wears the crown. It's a nest of vipers. It is, Robb admitted. But vipers can be charmed, or at least watched. He looked down at the letter again. If Daenerys Targaryen is indeed moving west, if she truly means to claim all of Westeros, we can't meet her as 7 bickering little kingdoms snapping at her heels. We need to know where we stand with each other first. What Stannis wants. What Dorne will do. What the Reach expects. I can't do that from Winterfell's walls. Men, guy. And if they keep you, Arya said, if they throw you in a cell like they did Father, then the North will come for me, Robb said simply. They've done it before. His tone made a few of the older lords in the room glance at each other, remembering Moat Cailin and the rivers thick with marching men. He did not say that if the South chose to betray him, it would not only lose a king, it would lose any hope of facing dragons and winter both with anything like unity. Take me, Arya said. Robb hesitated. He saw Sansa open her mouth to protest, then close it again. Her blue eyes weighed the room, then turned back to him. She knows the city better than any of us, Sansa said slowly. The people, the alleys, the faces. If there is danger, she will see it before the rest. A Stark girl walking those streets. Davos began, then trailed off as he looked at Arya. Her stance, the way she wore her sword, the way she seemed already to know every exit in the chamber. She'll not be walking, Greyjohn said with a sudden grin. She'll be stalking like a cat in a rookery. Robb thought of Bran's letters from the Isle, little more than scattered phrases but full of odd wisdom. He thought of a line Bran had written once in a childish, unsteady hand. The pack must go together when the woods are dark. Both of you, he said at last. Sansa will stand in my place here. Arya will ride with me and a hand-picked guard. That's not what I meant, Sansa said, startled. I know, Robb said. But you're the best we have at keeping lords honest when their king isn't looking. And someone has to make sure Rickon doesn't teach the direwolves to sleep in the Great Hall again. Milnie. Da. Sansa's mouth tugged despite herself. He says they sleep better on stone, she said. They like the echo. They'll like it fine in the kennels, Robb said. Or the gods would. Not at my table. So it's settled. Arya bounced to her feet, eyes flashing. We go south again. Carefully, Robb said. We are not the same as we were. Neither is the world. The journey to King's Landing was shorter this time, and stranger. Villages that had once stared mistrustfully at a northern host with Lannister banners on the horizon now came out of their houses smiling, or at least openly curious. Little boys with sticks for swords ran beside the king's column for a way, shouting nonsense war cries. Women held up infants to see the direwolf standard. At a crossroads inn near the Trident, an old man with a scar puckering half his face raised his cup in a trembling salute as Robb entered. Your Grace, he wheezed. Never thought to see the day I'd call a Stark that, but there you are. You got my boy back from the lion camps at the fords. That's worth a crown in my book. Menda, I'm ye, but show. Robb inclined his head. I only did what any lord should. The old man cackled. Then it's a sorry lot of lords we've had if that's so rare men write songs about it. He thumped his cup on the table. Drink. Whatever lies ahead, you'll need a clear head and a rough tongue. Arya drank with the men by the fire, laughing, listening to the stories that wormed their way under walls and through locked doors. Sansa's letters rode with them, carried by separate messengers. She wrote of grain tallies and minor disputes, of Rickon breaking 2 practice swords on the same day, of Bran's ravens from the green places between. When at last they came within sight of the capital, the smell hit Robb first. King's Landing still stank, even without the worst of the refuse piling in alleys, with more city guardsmen now assigned to street cleaning and less to beating the poor for sport. The city was a press of too many bodies in too small a space. Refugees from the North's winter and the Stormland's thin harvests huddled in tenements that leaned against each other like drunks. The masts in the harbor were thick as reeds, but there were fewer golden lions carved on door lintels now, and more stags and suns and roses. Banners fluttered above the city gates, the crowned stag and fiery heart most prominent. But beside it, the 7-pointed star of the faith, the sun and spear of Dorne, the rose of the Reach, the trout of Riverrun. No dire wolf. Not yet. The gates swung wide at their approach. Sir Davos Seaworth rode out to meet them, cloak snapping in the wind, his fingers missing from one hand but his grip on the reins steady. "Your Grace." He bowed from the saddle in that awkward, sea-worn way of his. "Welcome to King's Landing, Lord Davos." Robb inclined his head. "It's good to see a familiar face." "Your banners are impressive," Davos said, looking back at the northern column. "The small folk have been talking of your coming for days. Half of them are out here to stare. The other half are hiding in their beds, hoping you don't decide to finish what the lions started." "Nunti. God no. I'll try to disappoint them," Robb said dryly. They rode in through the mud gate with a thunder of hooves. The city sounds rose around them like surf, crying hawkers, clattering carts, the mutter and shout of thousands of lives packed too close together. Robb smelled fish and smoke, spices and shit. He remembered Sansa's stories of this place, the bright, terrible guilt over rot. Arya rode at his side, her eyes flicking everywhere at once. Upper windows, shadowed corners, rooftop ledges. In the Red Keep's throne room, Stannis Baratheon sat the Iron Throne like a man who found the thing mildly uncomfortable but tolerable. His crown of blunt points rested on thinning black hair. Arianne Martell sat beside him in a chair of carved darkwood, her sun-dark skin and loose sable hair a sharp contrast to the cold stones around her. Renly lounged one step lower, an apple in his hand, his wine-dark doublet embroidered with little golden stags in a pattern so subtle you could miss it at a distance. "Your Grace," Stannis said as Robb approached the foot of the throne. His voice was sandpaper over steel as ever. "You look older." "So do you," Robb said, "like a man who spends too much time with paper." Renly laughed. Stannis' mouth twitched, almost but not quite a smile. "We have all been busy winning wars," Arianne said smoothly, her dark eyes appraising Robb. "Though some of us have had more dramatic ones than others." She nodded toward the Northman's wolf-embroidered cloak. "You took Casterly Rock from beneath Tywin Lannister's nose. You held the wall. You broke the Kraken. The bards in the Street of Silk are half in love with you." "Those bards weren't at the Fist," Robb said. "They didn't see the dead rise. I'd trade half their songs for fewer names on the cairns." "Spoken like a Stark," Arianne said, and inclined her head. "Come then. Let us speak bad news and hard choices. That's why kings meet." "Me." In the council chamber, the map of Westeros was worn smooth where men's fingers had traced borders and roads. New lines had been inked, carefully. The heavy border around the north and Trident, marked with a direwolf instead of a crown. The distinct shading around the Iron Islands, labeled tenuously with Asha Greyjoy's name. Dotted lines across the narrow sea, where sailors had reported dragon sightings. "Slaver's Bay is gone," Davos said, tapping the eastern coast. "They call it the Bay of Dragons now. Some mockingly, some not. 3 cities broken, Astapor, Yunkai, Meereen. An army of freedmen under a queen's banner. She's not moved west yet, but she's stopped still as a cat watching a mouse hole." "Nah. And the mouse is us," Renly said. 3 dragons, Stannis said. "Flat. Adult." Young adults, Arianne said, fingers laced. Grown enough to carry riders. Big enough to burn a ship to ash in one pass, if sailors' tales are true. You don't believe sailors? Stannis said. I believe smoke on the horizon and cities that no longer trade, she said. I believe fear. It tastes the same in any tongue. If she comes, your grace, it will not be as a supplicant. No, I can't tell. Stannis looked at Robb. What say you? I say wars end badly when everyone assumes the other man will break first, Robb said. She has reason to hate the Lannisters. They murdered her nieces and nephews. They hunted her and her brother. But she has less reason to hate you. You ended Joffrey. You broke Cersei's hold. You've done more to clean the rot her father left than any man since. And yet I sit his throne, Stannis said. His daughter's throne by her reckoning. Do you? Renly asked lightly. Our dear father's throne, that is. Robert's. It was never truly Aerys's by right either, if you follow the Blackfire lines hard enough. Enough, Stannis said, glowering. Robb let them snap at each other for a moment. Then he said, You can't outmatch her in the sky. Not without your own dragons, and I see none perched on the Sept of Baelor. We have Wildfire, said one of the king's newer counselors. A hard-eyed knight from the Reach whose name Robb struggled to recall. And how did that go the last time someone tried to drench this city in it? Robb asked. Silence. Even Stannis' jaw clenched. You want my counsel, Robb said. Here it is. Bend only where it keeps your people alive. Don't invite her to rule you, but send to her. Parley. Show her what you've made of the realm she thinks of as stolen. What have we made? Renly asked, quieter. Honestly, a mess, Arianne said dryly. But a better mess than before. We ended the worst of the Lord's rights in the Riverlands and the Crownlands, Davos said. We hanged half the worst of Gregor Clegane's old men. The faith likes that. The poor like that. The old lords don't, but they grumble in their cups more than they rebel these days. Who'd they send for? A Lannister in exile? Euron Greyjoy? He shrugged. Better the Hard King you know than a Kraken on the throne. And the North? Stannis asked. What would you show her? Robb thought of winter stores, of wildlings trading furs at Winterfell's gates, instead of raiding farms, of Jones' letters full of slow, stubborn work. He thought of how much he still didn't know how to fix. Old feuds, bastards treated like ghosts. The way some northern lords were slower to take a woman's word than a man's even when the woman had saved their sons' lives. A kingdom that remembers winter, he said, and intends to survive the next one. Stannis' eyes met his. For a moment, something passed between them. Reluctant respect, perhaps. Or simply the recognition of two men who would both rather have been anything but kings and had done the work anyway. Very well, Stannis said. We will send an envoy. She may refuse, or she may answer with fire. But we will have done what we could to avoid burning the realm again. No, Renly smiled. I'll go, he said. Someone should show her the best of us. You're not leaving King's Landing while the Tyrell stew in Highgarden, Arianne said. I like you, Renly, but I'm not a fool. They'll have your head on a plate the moment you step out of sight of those walls. Then who? Renly asked. Someone who has fought for more than chairs and names, Davos said. Someone who broke chains instead of small folk. Someone who can look her in the eye and say he didn't profit from what her father did. Me. Slowly, nearly every gaze in the chamber turned to Robb. No, he said at once. I can't leave the North without a king. Not while the others still stir in the far wastes, and the South still hasn't quite decided if it likes me. You have Sansa, Arya said from the doorway. She had slipped in silently, old habits hard to break. And Jon Doy. And Bran, though no one sees him but ravens and roots. They'll keep things safe. You're better at talking to people who think the world owes them things than you think. Nay, I don't flatter kings, Robb said. Good, Arya said. She's had enough of that from slavers. Stannis frowned. There is risk. There always is, Arianne said. If we send a lesser man, it will look like a slight. If we send a sellsword, it will look like a threat. If we send no one, she shrugged. Then the dance begins with fire first. Robb looked down at the map. His finger brushed the blue-painted narrow sea, the jagged eastern coast. He saw ships in his mind's eye, dragons above them, the flash of fire reflected on water. He thought of Bran's letters, of dreams where he burned, where he broke, where he never went at all, and the world ended in white. I'll go, he said. Arya's hand closed around his wrist under the table, hard enough to bruise. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Then I'm coming too, she said. Someone has to make sure you don't get eaten. The ship that sailed from King's Landing a fortnight later bore no royal banners, only a plain sail and a small carved wolf at the prow. Robb watched the city recede from the deck, its walls shrinking, the red keep turning from bloody stone to a dark smudge on the horizon. Sea spray stung his face. Arya leaned over the rail, laughing as the ship rolled, the wind tangling her hair. Davos stood with his good hand on the wheel, his eyes on the waves. If she kills us, Arya said cheerfully, Sansa will be so angry. Sansa will be queen, Robb said. Off something. The North, the Trident, my grave. Take your pick. Arya's smile faded. Don't, she said. Don't talk like that. Bran wrote. He said the path that ends in ash is the one you're furthest from now. He said the world's roots are shifting under us. Whoa. Robb closed his eyes briefly. Bran's ravens came rarely, but when they did, their words lingered. Sometimes the letters were maddeningly vague. Sometimes they were so precise they made Robb's skin crawl. Do you trust him? Robb asked quietly. Arya looked out at the waves. He's my brother, she said. He's a tree. He's a god. I don't know. I trust that he's trying not to let us all die screaming. That's enough. May. Robb had been raised to trust steel and walls and men's oaths, not dreams and whispers. But the world had changed around him like a field under snow. There were dragons in the sky now, and dead things in the far north that would never be fully gone. It would be foolish to pretend that only swords mattered. He watched the sea and let his mind move over the wars he had fought. Every battle he had won. Some by steel, some by guile, some by simply refusing to lose. He had sent men into danger. He had watched them die. He had made choices that cost lives. Sometimes in the watches of the night he saw again all the ways it could have gone wrong. The horse stumbling at Whispering Wood. The Great Jones' charge breaking on a wall of Lannister spears. The Rock's sea tunnel flooding at the wrong moment. The wall cracking under the Dead's assault. In those dreams, he failed. In those dreams, the North burned or froze, or simply crumbled. He woke with his heart hammering, Grey Wind's descendants snarling in their sleep at his bedside. Each time he rose, dressed, and went back to work. Now he sailed toward another war, though he prayed it would not come to that. He did not know whether the streak of white in his hair had grown. He no longer looked at mirrors long enough to notice. Davos came to stand beside him. Ever been at sea before, Your Grace? He asked. Once, Robb said. When we took the Rock's harbor, the waves were angrier then. They usually are when someone's pouring fire on them, Davos said. My advice if it comes to that again, duck. Robb huffed a laugh. Sound counsel. I'll try to remember. Davos' smile faded. I've seen fire on the water twice now, he said. Once at Blackwater, once at Eastwatch when we burned ships to keep the dead from using them. I don't much care to see it a third time. Then let's hope this queen listens, Robb said. Hope, Davos said, and a good tongue. And a sword, Arya added. And a sword, Davos agreed. Marine's pyramids rose from the sea like the teeth of some buried giant, gold and stone gleaming in the hard sun. As the ship approached, Robb saw dragons circling above. 3 dark specks that resolved into wings and sinew and fire as they drew nearer. His grip tightened on the rail despite himself. The largest dragon, black with red-tipped wings, swooped low over the ship, shadows swallowing the deck for an instant. The wind from its passing almost knocked him backwards. Arya yelped and grinned, bracing herself with her boots wide. "Beautiful," she breathed. "Terrifying," Davos muttered. "Both," Robb said. The dragon banked and soared back toward the city. On the high terrace of the Great Pyramid, Daenerys Targaryen watched it with her hand lightly resting on the shoulder of the smallest of the 3. Its scales were the color of old bronze. Its eyes were molten gold. "He is excited," she said. "He smells strangers," Missandei said beside her. "And salt." "Starks, if the ravens are right," Daenerys murmured. "I never thought the first northern wolf I met would come on a ship instead of across a frozen field." She wore no crown today, only a simple dress of white and blue that caught the hot wind. She had learned in Meereen that sometimes a queen looked stronger without her dragons than with them. Sometimes. "Should we keep them waiting?" Dario Naharis asked from the doorway, smiling lazily, hand on his curved-bladed sword. "Make them sweat in the heat a bit. Northerners like the cold, I have heard." "No," Daenerys said. "They come as envoys, not supplicants. I have treated enough rulers as if they were less than human. It sours the tongue." She thought of the Meereenese nobility, of the endless churning battle between those who had lost everything and those who still thought the world owed them more. She thought of the slaver princes of Yunkai, who had smiled and patted her hand and sent assassins instead of gifts. She would not start this new game with lies. There would be time enough for that if it went wrong. When the Stark envoys were brought up, the heat made Robb feel as though he were wrapped in a dozen cloaks. Sweat prickled under his hair, but he kept his shoulders square and his pace even. The queen on the terrace looked younger than he had expected. Not in years, she was close to his age, he thought, but in quickness. Her eyes were bright and sharp. Her hair shone like poured silver. The dragons behind her wafted fire and smoke, restless but restrained. "Your Grace," Robb said, bowing just enough to be courteous without lowering himself like a petitioner. "I am Robb Stark, King in the North and of the Trident. This is my sister, Arya." Daenerys' gaze flicked to Arya. Small, dark, dangerous, and something like recognition moved in her face. "Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen," she said. "Breaker of chains, mother of dragons, currently queen of a city that does not yet know how to live without its chains." Her mouth quirked. "Titles are troublesome things. I find crowns heavier than I expected," Robb said. "We have that in common, it seems." She studied him openly. He stood like a soldier. There was a scar along his hairline, a white streak in his brown hair. His eyes were clear and tired both. "They say you have never lost a battle," she said. "They say a great many things," Robb replied. "Most of them flattering, most of them wrong." "Modest," Dario muttered. "Practical," Robb said without looking at him. "A man who thinks he can't lose is halfway to doing so." Daenerys' mouth curved. "Then perhaps there is hope for this council," she said. "Come, sit. Tell me why the kings of Westeros send me a wolf instead of a stag or a son." They spoke in the shade of the terrace, with pitchers of watered wine sweating on the table between them. Arya wandered to the edge, leaning out to watch the city seethe below. Davos sat quietly behind Robb's left shoulder, listening, occasionally murmuring a reminder or question. Daenerys listened more than she spoke at first. Robb told her of the war in the north, of the Lannister banners pulled down and the rock taken. He spoke of the battle for the wall, of dead kings turned wraiths and giants breaking ice with their fists. "You fought the others," she said softly, "and lived." "Many didn't," he said, "but enough did." He spoke of Stannis' reign, hard, unyielding, but less bloody than she had feared. He spoke of Ariane Martel's temper and careful queenship, of Renly's laughter and courts that had once been full of quiet terror. He did not pretend the realm was healed. He showed it to her as it was, scarred, stumbling, better in some places, worse in others. "And you?" she asked at last. "What do you want, Robb Stark? The North is free. You hold more land than any other king. You have gold from the rock, respect from your people. Why risk a sea crossing to speak to a foreign queen with fire at her fingertips? Because the last time a king in the North ignored what moved beyond his walls, winter nearly killed us all," he said. "Because dragons don't stop at borders. Because my people remember what southern wars can do to northern fields. And I will not let them starve because some man with a better claim than another decides to make a point." "No, sure. And what would you have me do?" Her eyes were cool. "Go back to being hunted? Stay in the East and pretend the West is no business of mine? Let the men who murdered my kin sit their thrones unchallenged?" "No," Robb said. "I'd have you look at what is there now, not what was. Stannis Baratheon is not Tywin Lannister. Ariane Martell is not Cersei. The small folk who live under them bend their backs for bread, not chains. If you come to Westeros as vengeance, you'll burn what little has been built. If you come as a queen who wants a place, not the whole board, then maybe." He spread his hands. "Maybe?" she prompted. "Maybe we can build something that doesn't end in ash or ice," he said. "I can't promise you the Iron Throne. I wouldn't, even if I could. But I can promise this. If you come for all 7 kingdoms, you'll find the North and the Trident standing together to stop you. If you come seeking a share instead of all, if you're willing to let go of the idea that the only way to be queen is to have every man and woman between the Wall and Dorne bending the knee, then..." He met her gaze steadily. "Then you might find more allies than you expect." Dario snorted softly. "You would have her take some dusty rocks and leave the sword chair to a man who took it from her father?" Daenerys' hand lifted very slightly. He fell silent. The dragons shifted behind her, hissing softly. One spread its wings, casting the terrace into shadow for an instant. "Do you think I deserve that throne?" she asked. Robb hesitated. "I think you've suffered for it," he said. "I think you've done more to prove you understand the people under your feet than half the men who ever sat it. But I don't think thrones are about deserving. I think they're about what the world can survive." "And you think it cannot survive me?" There was no heat in the question, only curiosity and a thin thread of something sharper. "I think it might not survive another war on that scale," he said. "Not after the last. Not after winter. Not with the things beyond the Wall still stirring. You can burn King's Landing. You can break Stannis. But every house you burn is a field unplanted. Every soldier you kill is hands that won't hold a spear when the dead march again." "Naive. Always the dead," she said softly. "Your North thinks of little else." "Someone has to," he said. She leaned back, studying him. Wind lifted her hair. The city roared below, full of people who had never seen Westeros, who would live and die under a queen who might never cross the sea. "I freed these people," she said quietly. "Or I tried to. It nearly broke me. Every step forward, 2 back. For every master I hanged, 10 more learned to hide their chains better. I thought, if I can just reach Westeros, if I can take back what was stolen, everything will make sense." "Nah." She looked out toward the faint line of the horizon. "You tell me that if I do that, I may destroy not just those who wronged me, but those who had no hand in it. That I may make winter win." "Yes," Robb said. "Do you know how arrogant that sounds?" she asked, a hint of laughter in her voice. "Yes," he said again. "But I've seen what lies beyond the Wall. I've watched giants die holding gates. I've watched corpses climb over each other like ants, driven by a will that only wants to see the world empty. There's no arrogance in being afraid of that. Now, underneath." Herman, Demno, Nazi, Elfra. Silence stretched between them. Arya watched from the edge of the terrace, her hand resting lightly on Needle's hilt, though no threat moved. In the roots beneath the world, Bran watched too. This moment had 1,000 reflections in the pool of time. In some, Daenerys laughed and had Robb killed for his presumption, feeding his body to her dragons as a message. In some, he drew steel first, and the terrace ran red. He held his breath, metaphorically, for he had no lungs, as this Robb and this Daenerys balanced on the edge of choice. Then Daenerys Stormborn, breaker of chains, exhaled. "I have had enough of burning cities," she said softly. "Enough of crucifixes and screams. Enough of men telling me the only way to be strong is to be merciless." "Good," Robb said, the tension in his shoulders easing a fraction. "So have I." "What would you have of me then?" she asked. "Be your ally? Rule the East and leave you your winter kingdom? Send my dragons when the dead move, and otherwise pretend my father's throne was never my concern?" "Nah, no one can ask you to pretend," he said. "But I can ask you to choose a different battle. Not against men who might yet learn better, but against the things that cannot. Help us hold the wall. Help us ensure there is still a world for any crown to sit upon." He paused. "And if, afterward, the realm asks for you to sit that throne, if they demand it, then you'll sit it not as a conqueror, but as someone they chose. If they don't, you'll still have your dragons, your freedmen, your cities. You'll still be a queen, just not the only one." "Nay, many-headed dragon," Dario muttered. "Many-headed wolf, too," Arya said. "We've got enough stubborn Starks for 3 kingdoms." Daenerys looked from one to the other, then back at Robb. "In Karth," she said, "they told me I was meant to break the wheel, to shatter the way the world worked and make it new. It sounded glorious then. A dragon's work. Now I think, perhaps breaking is easy. Perhaps what matters is what you build instead." She stood. "If I agree to this," she said, "it will not be because I forget what was stolen. It will be because I choose not to steal more from others to fill that hole. I will need concessions, assurances." "Nay, wait, Edna." "Name them," Robb said. She smiled, a slow, dangerous curve. "Later," she said, "when the wine flows and the dragons sleep. For now, tell me about this wall I'm to help you hold. Tell me what kind of enemy my children are to face." He told her. He did not gild it or soften. He spoke of snow that never seemed to end, of wind that cut through flesh and memory, of eyes like pale knives, of a sound like ice cracking forever. As he did, the sun slipped toward the horizon. The dragons quieted, their heads drooping. By the time he finished, the sky over Marine was streaked with red and gold. "That is not a war of queens and kings," Daenerys said at last. "That is a war for breath." "Yes," Robb said. She looked at him, and for a moment he saw, clearly, terribly, the weight on her shoulders. Not just her own dead, not just her father's sins and her brother's failures, but a world that kept asking her to choose between fire and blood and something harder. "It seems we fight the same enemy after all, Robb Stark," she said. "Very well. I will come west. Not as conqueror, but as ally, of sorts. Nay, Dizzy, God sure, therefore." He nodded once. "I'll hold you to that." "And I you," she said. In the roots beneath the Isle of Faces, Bran Stark let out a breath he hadn't known had been holding. The visions around him settled, many threads knotting into one thicker rope. "Is it done?" Leaf asked. "No," Bran said. "It's never done." He watched ships being prepared in Marine's harbor, dragons wheeling overhead. He watched ravens taking flight from Winterfell's rookery, carrying news to Jon at the Wall, to Sansa in the north, to Stannis in King's Landing. He watched a map of Westeros with new banners inked at its edges. Wolves and stags and dragons drawn together like constellations. But for now, he said, it's enough. On a terrace in a city far from home, a wolf and a dragon sat together in the falling light, speaking of winter. In the yard of Winterfell, children played at war and at peace, their sticks clacking, their laughter rising with the breath of the warm springs. In the deep, the real enemy stirred and listened and waited. Robb Stark's northern armies would win every battle they had to fight, in this world, in the shadows of others. Not because some god decreed it, but because a boy had knelt at a tree and asked to be kept honest. Because a broken child learned to see and chose not to rule. Because a girl who had walked through fire decided she had burned enough. The Seven Kingdoms would never be one thing again. They would be many, north and south, river and desert, island and mountain, tied not by one throne, but by threads of choice and blood and shared survival. Forever was too long a word for men to own. But for as long as winter came and went, for as long as children in snow and sun both played at crowns and set them aside for supper when called, the world they had remade would stand. The council on the terrace did not end when the sun went down. By the time the last jug of wine was empty and the lamps were lit, a breeze had picked up from the bay, cooling the air and making the brazier's coals glow brighter. The dragons had settled on the far edge of the terrace, three hulking shadows with slow burning eyes, their breathing a steady rumble like distant thunder. You have told me what you want, Daenerys said at last. Or what you think the world needs. I will tell you what I want. Robb sat with his forearms on his knees, the cup forgotten in his hand. Arya had gone to sleep curled against a pillar, one arm flung over her eyes. Davos was still awake but heavy-lidded, expression intent. Say it plain, Robb said. Daenerys flicked a glance at him, unreadable. I will not bend the knee to Stannis Baratheon, she said. I will not sail across the world to place a crown on the head of the man who sits my father's chair, and then go home like a good little girl. If I come west, it will be as a queen in my own right. Not of all Westeros. She lifted a hand as he opened his mouth. But of something that is more than a polite fiction. A strip of rocks and titles to flatter me will not be enough. Dragonstone, Davos said quietly. Daenerys' head turned. What? What? Dragonstone, he repeated. Your father's seat before he was king. The Targaryen foothold in Westeros since Aegon came with his sisters. Stannis was given it as a sop by Robert. He's Lord of Dragonstone now by law and grant. But if there's any part of Westeros that's truly yours, my queen, it's that. My lord, she said dryly. I have not called you that in some time. You still might, Davos said, when you're angry with me. She almost smiled. Dragonstone is a symbol, Davos went on. To the east, to the west. If Stannis yields it, if he leaves it to you as your holding, it would cost him little in men and grain and much in pride. The kind of pride kings can stand to spend, if they've sense. Robb was nodding. If Stannis is to ask you to fight for this realm, he's going to have to give something. That would be the thing. Acknowledge you as Queen of Dragonstone, Princess of the Narrow Sea, what have you. Not under him. Beside him. Not under him. Beside him. And beside you? Daenerys asked. Robb met her gaze squarely. I am not a vassal of the Iron Throne, he said. Not anymore. If we fight together, it will be as allies. Equal crowns, equal risks, equal say. Equal burdens, she said. I know how heavy they are, he replied. Silence settled for a moment under the dragon's slow breaths. You would have 3 kings in one realm, Daenerys said after a while. A stag in the south, a wolf in the north, a dragon on an island between, and a sun in Dorne, a rose in the reach, a kraken trying very hard not to drown, Davos said. We already have a realm of too many kings, your grace. The only question now is whether we can be more than that when it matters. Names are wind. What counts is who sends men when the ice comes. 4 crowns, Robb said. 5, 7, if you want to count each region's words. It matters less than whether we can sit at a table and not reach for our swords every time someone breathes. Money. Words are not only wind, Daenerys said. Words are chains too. Oaths, promises. You speak as if you mean to keep yours. That is rare. Robb thought of Bran's letters, of dreams that left him shaking because he had broken promises in them and watched the world crack. I do, he said simply. Then here are mine, Daenerys said. If Stannis Baratheon cedes Dragonstone to me as my seat in Westeros, recognizing me as Queen of Dragonstone and of the lands that willingly bend the knee to my house in the east, I will come. I will bring what armies I can spare in my dragon's north. I will fight at the wall, or wherever you say the fighting is worst, against these others. I will not turn my dragons on the cities of Westeros while that war is being fought. She spread her fingers. We will see what kind of world we have left. We will see what its people wish. If they call for me, I will answer. If they do not, a tiny, bitter smile. I will still have my freed cities and my stubborn people and my dragons. I will not be nothing. Arya's voice came from the shadow near the pillar. You wouldn't be nothing anyway, she said, eyes glinting. My father used to say, there's more honor in keeping 10 scared people fed through winter than in winning any tournament. Daenerys looked at her. He said that? Something like it, Arya said, levering herself up on an elbow. I was listening through the door. He never knew I was there. Daenerys was quiet for a long heartbeat. Then your father and I might have liked each other, she said. Robb smiled, faint and sad. He thought your brother might have been a good king, he said. Rhaegar. Her voice sharpened. He said that? He did, Robb said. He also thought the world liked to find ways to break good men. He was trying very hard not to let it break him. And did it? Daenerys asked. They cut off his head for telling the truth, Robb said. And I spent 4 years trying to make sure that's not how the story ends. She looked at him a long time. Very well, she said softly. I will come west. We will try. Nay. Bran, watching in the roots, let the vision drift outward. Beyond Meereen, beyond the narrow sea, ravens took flight like a spill of ink. Sansa read the letter 3 times. The parchment crackled under her fingers. The wax seals, one a direwolf, one a stag, one a 3-headed dragon, seemed almost to shift when she moved it, the colors catching the light of the candles in the solar. Daenerys Targaryen, she said aloud, tasting the words. Queen of Meereen and Dragonstone. She does not have Dragonstone yet, my lady. Maester Luwin said gently. His beard had grown wider these past harsh years, but his eyes were as shrewd as ever. That will depend on King Stannis' will. On his sense, Davos had written in a cramped hand in the margin, and his wife's, and Renly's tongue. Sansa smiled despite herself at that last. She could imagine the arguments in the Red Keep now. The Red Woman's hard eyes, Arianne's crisp fury, Renly's lazy barbs, Stannis' thunder. They'll come to terms, she said. Perhaps, Luwin said. Perhaps not. Men do not easily give up symbols. Dragonstone was Robert's gift to his brother, and kings can be as jealous of their brothers as any other man. Nay. Sansa set the letter down. Her hair was braided in the northern style now, but sometimes she caught sight of herself in polished metal and saw, for an instant, the girl she had been in King's Landing. Soft-faced, eager for songs. That girl had wanted a golden crown. This Sansa counted grain. She knew exactly how many bushels were stored in the winter town, how many mouths each one might feed, how far a wagon of oats could travel in deep snow before the horses drop. Stannis loves justice, she said. More than he loves symbols. If he believes giving Dragonstone to Daenerys will keep the realm from more war, he'll do it. And what of you? Luwin asked. How do you feel about dragons flying over your kingdom? Sansa's hand tightened on the table's edge. For a moment she smelled smoke and panic. the way the sept had reeked when the mob crashed through its doors. "I'm afraid," she said, "but I've been afraid before. I'd rather a dragon that listens than one that comes whether we want it or not. If Robb thinks this is the only way to keep the wall standing, then I'll swallow my fear and find ways to make our people see sense." Some will never accept it," Lewin said. "Old men whose fathers fought the dragons, whose sons died on the trident. Some will never accept anything," Sansa said. "But most only want to know if they'll be fed and safe. I can work with that." She folded the letter carefully and set it beside the others stacked on her desk. The window let in pale spring light. Outside, the roofs of Winterfell steamed where the hot springs melted snow. "Any word from Bran?" she asked. Lewin shook his head. "No ravens in 6 days. That is not unusual, my lady. It always felt unusual when there was nothing." Bran's letters came like odd, thoughtful stones dropped into the lake of their lives, sending ripples. When they did not come, the surface felt too still. Sansa went to the window and looked out. Rickon was in the yard with the young squires, his hair a wild snarl, his laugh sharp. One of the direwolves, Shaggy Dog, she thought, loped at his side, tongue lolling. "I dreamed of him last night," she said without meaning to. "Bran?" Lewin asked. "Yes." She hugged her arms around herself. He was in the Godswood, under the heart tree. Only the roots went on forever, down into dark. There were faces in them, watching. Lewin's brow furrowed. "We do not fully understand what Bran has become," he said. "Only that it is old, older than our books." "I know," Sansa said. She wondered whether he still saw them as they were. Whether, when he closed whatever eyes he had now, he could picture her as the sister who had braided his hair, or whether he saw only a piece on a board he was trying very hard not to knock over. "Right back," she said. "Tell Robb we're ready. If dragons come, we'll mend our roofs. If winter comes again, we'll do what we always have." "And if both come?" Lewin asked. "Then we'll do what Starks always do," Sansa said. "We'll stand." On the Isle of Faces, Bran woke from his watching with sap stiff on his cheeks. The cavern was dim, lit only by the greenish glow that seemed to seep from the roots themselves. Leaf sat across from him, her little legs folded under her, weaving something fine from thin, pliant branches. "You look pleased," she said. "Stannis said yes," Bran said. "Or he will tomorrow. I've seen it." "You look ahead more often now," Leaf said mildly. "You did not, at first." "I was afraid to," Bran admitted. "Every time I did, I saw endings. Robb dying at a feast, dragons burning cities, the world white and empty. Now when I look, I see paths." "And you think you can choose them," Leaf said. "I think I can help men choose them," he said. "I don't move their hands, I just..." He groped for a word. "Nudge," she supplied. "Yes," Bran said. "Like a snowflake that falls just so on a branch. One more, and it breaks. One less, and it holds." "No." "And if it needed to break?" Leaf asked. Bran frowned. "Why would it? Perhaps the weight behind it was rotten," she said. "Perhaps it was better for it to fall and be built anew than to sag until it crushed everything beneath. You think as a Stark, Bran. You think of holding. Sometimes the world needs breaking." "The world has had enough breaking," Bran said. "My father's head, Summer's howls, the way Arya looks when someone mentions King's Landing. I don't..." His throat closed for a moment. He had not had to shape words with a tongue in some time, but the feeling was still there. Leaf watched him with head cocked. "You love your pack," she said. "It is your strength. It is also the blindfold you tie around your own eyes." "I see plenty," Bran said more sharply than he'd meant. "You see the paths that keep them alive," she said. "You do not always look at the ones that do not, at what might grow in their place." "Duh." He flinched, remembering visions he had quickly pulled away from. A world where Robb died at the Twins, and and Sansa became something hard-edged and cold in a southern court, where Arya's face changed so often, she forgot her own. A world where Jon held a different sort of power in the north, black and icy and endless. "I don't want that world," he said. "I know," Leaf said, "but you should not pretend it never was, or never could be. You are not only a boy in a tree, you are the memory of what could have been. If you forget that, you are only telling yourself a pretty story." "Nay. Why?" Bran said nothing. After a moment, Leaf smiled. A flash of small, sharp teeth. "For now," she said lightly, "tell me about the dragons. Are they as beautiful as the old songs say?" Bran closed his eyes again and let his sight ride the wind. He saw Marine's Bay, the ships being gathered, the dragons wheeling. He let his awareness brush briefly over the Black One, feeling a hot, alien mind brimming with hunger and pride. It noticed him, tilted its head in the sky, flame gathering in its throat. Bran withdrew quickly. "They're a lot," he said. Leaf laughed, delighted. "Good. It would be boring if they were not." Daenerys stood barefoot on the black stone of Dragonstow's shore and felt home through her skin. Not Meereen home built from sweat and struggle and compromise, but something older, something carved into the bones of her family. The air smelled of salt and old storms. The great carved dragons on the castle's walls loomed above her, wings outspread, mouths agape. Her own dragons wheeled overhead, answering the stone beasts with shrieks and roars. The island shook when the biggest one, Drogon, for there was no better name, landed on a jut of rock and sent a spray of waves crashing down. Stannis and Arianne waited higher up the shore, under the shadow of a weather-beaten banner. Stannis' face was as pinched as ever, but there was a stiff formality to the way he held himself, as if he knew he was about to do something that would have made Robert roar with disbelief. "Your Grace," Daenerys said as she climbed the last few steps, sand sticking to her wet feet. "I thank you for your hospitality." "Dragonstone is poor in hospitality," Stannis said. "It is rich only in rocks and ghosts." "And dragons," Arianne said, eyes flicking pointedly to the sky. "One can have too much of those," Stannis said. Daenerys smiled slightly. "Some say that of kings." Stannis' jaw tightened. Then he drew a breath and squared his shoulders. "Before these witnesses," he said, "I, Stannis Baratheon, first of my name, king of the Andals and the Rhoynar and the First Men, do cede all right and claim to the island and stronghold of Dragonstone to Daenerys Targaryen, daughter of Aerys and Rhaella, to be hers and Rhaella, to be hers and her heirs in perpetuity, so long as she keep faith with the realm and the treaties with. May the gods judge us both harshly if we break this pact." "No." It was as generous as she could have expected from him, Daenerys thought. Perhaps more. "I accept," she said, and the words felt like something slotting into place, a stone put where it was always meant to go. "I take Dragonstone for my house. I keep faith with the realm, so long as the realm keeps faith with its people." Stannis' gaze flicked to her dragons and back. "See that you do," he said. Later, in the round chamber where the painted table lay with its old chipped map of Westeros, Robb traced a finger along the top of the wall. "Jon says they're not pushing as hard," he said, like a beast testing a fence, finding the weak spots. "And have they?" Daenerys asked. "They always do," Robb said. "That's what beasts are for." "And what are dragons for?" she asked, eyes on the table. "Terrifying beasts," Renly said, leaning at an angle against a pillar, green cloaks spilling around him. "Terrifying other beasts. And burning a lot of firewood if your stories are any guide." "No." Davos stood on the far side of the table, head bent. "They're for turning a battle," he said. "If we use them right. If we don't, they're for burning men who might have stood against the enemy otherwise. We have dragonglass enough for spearheads and swords. Ariane said. Dorne's mines may yet yield more. We have the wall and the men upon it. We have the North united and the Riverlands with it. We have the Reach and Stormlands sending men in rotation. We have a queen with 3 dragons. If we cannot kill the others now, we never will. 90. Stannis' mouth thinned. We will not lure them with bait made of city, he said. If they come south this time, they will find us ready. But I will not empty King's Landing for some reckless northern plan. I wouldn't ask it, Robb said. I mean to take the fight to them in their own territory. Beyond the wall, into the lands of always winter if we must. You sound like a boy planning to hunt a bear in its den, Stannis said. Have you thought that perhaps there is a reason men have never done this? Yes, Robb said. Mostly because there has never been a time when we had dragons and kings who could stand each other in the same lifetime. Daenerys let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Flatterer, she said very quietly. It will be dangerous, Davos said. Any force that goes that far north may not come home. They'll die anyway if we sit and wait, Robb said. His hand moved further north on the painted table, out of the familiar lands into the blank whiteness the mapmakers had never filled with more than vague lines. The others are patient. They've slept for thousands of years. They can wait out walls and winters and kings. We can't. We have to break their heart. No. And where is that? Daenerys asked. Robb looked up, eyes seeking Bran's for an instant, though his brother was not there. I don't know, he said. But I know someone who might. Jon woke with his hand on Longclaw's hilt. The room in Castle Black was dark, the fire in the hearth no more than a smear of embers. Ghost lay in the corner, head up, ears pricked, red eyes staring at the door. Jon's breath slowed as his waking mind caught up. No shouts, no horns, no sound of dead hands on the wall. A raven's call broke the silence. Then another and another. A cacophony outside his window. He swung his legs out of bed and padded across the cold stones. When he opened the shutters, 20 beady eyes glared at him from his own sill. Ravens crowded every inch of stone, clutching it with sharp black claws. Their voices overlapped, a harsh, ugly chorus. Snow, snow, king, king, north, 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 we're. Enough, Jon said sharply. One at a time. One of the birds hopped forward, its feathers ragged. Its eyes were wrong. Too bright. Too knowing. Jon, it said, and for an instant, the voice was Bran's. Jon swallowed. I'm here. You need to come, the raven said. North. Further. There's a place where the cold pools, where the others were made, where they still remember what they were supposed to be. You have to break it, with fire and steel and May. And you, Jon said softly. You won't be alone, the raven went on, almost breathless. Robb is coming, with the Dragon Queen, with dragons. I can help you find the road. I can't walk it for you. Jon leaned his forearms on the sill. The night air bit at his skin. Ghost came to his side, head pressing lightly against Jon's hip. You want us to march into the heart of the enemy's land, Jon said. With dragons that might not like the cold, with men who barely know how to walk on the ice without freezing. You want us to gamble the last, best hope of the living on a hunt in a place we've never seen. Yes, the raven said. Jon closed his eyes. In the dark behind his eyelids, he saw all the battles they had fought. The desperate defense of the fist, the long night on the wall, the slow pushing back of whites into the snowfields. They had lost men every time, but they had held. He also saw something else. The way the dead moved now, slower, more cautious. The way the strange, sharp feeling in his bones had intensified whenever he rode north of the wall, as if he were drawing close to something old and watchful. Is there another way? He asked. We can hold, the raven said. Maybe, for a while. Feathers ruffled in the dark. But every time they test us, we lose more. They lose too, but they can raise ours. We can't raise theirs. That's not a game we can win by playing it forever. We never win those, John said. We just outlast them. This one doesn't end, Bran said through the raven. Not on its own. Not this time. They've learned too much. You have to go where they are made and undo it, or we'll be doing this dance until the last fire goes out. John opened his eyes and stared at the line of black feathers. The sky above the wall was a scatter of stars, cold and hard. Robb is really coming? He asked. Yes, Bran said. With dragons. John breathed out slowly. Then I suppose I should make sure we've enough room on the wall for them to sit. The raven made a harsh sound that might have been a laugh. Then it bent its head, pecked once at the stone, and took off. The others followed in a rush of wings. Ghost huffed. I know, John said. I didn't think my life would end with dragons either. The day the dragons came to the wall, every man of the Night's Watch who could stand was on the walkway. The sky had been clear at dawn. By midday, high thin clouds were racing above from north to south, like a herald. The wind had a strange edge to it, sharp and hot by turns, as if uncertain which season it belonged to. John stood near the gate, cloak flapping around his legs. To his left, Dolorous Ed peered out, eyes narrowed. If I'd known we were getting dragons, m'lord, Ed muttered, I'd have cleaned me room. You didn't clean it when Stannis came, Gren said. Or when the wildlings did, or when the whites. I know, ED said. If I start now, the world will end for sure. Best leave miserable things be. Quiet, John said. He heard it then, a sound like tearing cloth, magnified 1,000 times. A deep roar that was not the wind. The first dragon appeared as a speck against the pale sky, growing with every heartbeat until it was a shape of huge, beating wings and long neck, its shadows spearing across the snow. Behind it came two more, their outlines blurred by their speed. Men on the wall ducked instinctively as the dragon swept low. Their bellies glimmered with scale. As they passed over the wall, their wing beats sent a physical shock through the stones, a boom that John felt in his teeth. They banked, wheeled, and came around again. This time the biggest, Drogon, hovered briefly above the wall's center, mighty wings beating, snow swirling in angry spirals around him. For an instant he seemed to hang there, defying gravity and sense. Then he landed. The impact shuddered through the ancient ice. Men flinched back. John's hand went to Longclaw's hilt without thinking. The dragon folded his wings, tail lashing. His scales were dark as coal, his eyes burning. Frost steamed where his claws dug into the ice. On his back, small against the vast neck, Daenerys Targaryen swung a leg over and slid down. Her cheeks were wind-burned, her hair blown wild beneath her cloak. She landed lightly, boots slipping for an instant on the ice before she found her balance. Robb dismounted from the smaller green dragon beside her, regal, with less grace, nearly going to one knee before Grey Wind's grandson shouldered under his arm and steadied him. Arya laughed, breath white in the air. Winterfell never prepared you for that, John called as he walked forward. Robb looked up, eyes squinting against the glare. Then he grinned, wide and sudden, and strode to meet John halfway. For a moment, the wall was silent save for Dragon's breath and the wind. The brothers stood facing each other, the years and crowns and scars between them. I thought you'd grown, John said. I thought you'd be dead, Robb said. John laughed hoarsely and pulled him into an embrace. Robb's arms went around him hard. Idiot, John muttered into his shoulder. Stubborn bastard, Robb muttered back. When they stepped back, there was a wetness in both their eyes that the wind quickly froze. Daenerys watched them with something like ache and envy twisting under her ribs. She thought of Rhaegar and Viserys, of brothers she had never truly had, of the way the world had taken them from her before they could ever stand like this. Lord Commander, she said when Jon turned to her, I am Daenerys Stormborn. Jon Snow, he said, bowing a little more stiffly than he had intended. "Welcome to the end of the world." She smiled. "I've been to a few of those. This one is the coldest." "You've not seen anything yet," John said. "Come inside. The wind will freeze that hair to your cheeks." "No, Jay." They gathered in the common hall. The great hall of the Night's Watch loomed with dragon shadow through the smoke hole. Men's faces were still pale, eyes darting to the doorway as if expecting a dragon's head to poke in and sniff the stew. "They'll get used to it," Arya said, grinning as she watched a young steward nearly drop a pot when Drogon's rumbling cough echoed from above. "They got used to wildlings and kings," John said. "Dragons are just bigger." "Everything's bigger up here," Daenerys said, warming her hands over a bowl. "The wall, the cold, the silence." No. "The enemy," John said. He spread a rough map on the table, weighted with stones. The lines marked their patrol routes, the places they'd seen whites, the last known position of larger groups. Further north, the map was more guesswork than fact, a blur of white and scribbled notes. "Bran says their heart lies here," John said, touching a blank spot in the far north. "Somewhere near the old woods where the land rises, the place the first men called the Night's Heart." Daenerys frowned. "I have never heard that name." "Most haven't," John said. "Winterfell's oldest books mention it barely. A place the children avoided even before the wall. A place where the cold pools." "Bran can feel it," Robb said quietly. "Through the roots, through the cold in the weirwoods. He says if we strike there, if we break whatever is bound there, the others will fall with it, or weaken, enough to push back for good." "And if he's wrong?" someone asked. A grizzled sergeant from Eastwatch, face like old leather. "Then we die," John said, "probably screaming. But if we do nothing, we die slowly instead. I'd rather take the scream and a chance." "Nah." Daenerys' fingers curled around the rim of her bowl. "I have seen cities fall slowly," she said. "Watched people starve over months. I prefer quicker endings too when I must have one." She tapped the map where Joan's finger had been. "How far?" 100 leagues beyond the wall," John said. "Maybe more. No sure paths, no cover, just ice and wind." "Dragons can fly over," Arya said, "and die in the wind without men to keep them fed and tethered," Daenerys said. "They are not gods. They are beasts. Hungry, stubborn, glorious, and breakable." "Nah," John nodded. "We'll need a force that can move fast and live hard. No siege engines, no wagons, packs and sleds. Men who know cold and do not fear it." "You have wildlings," Robb said. "Free folk. They know the land better than any of us." "They won't like taking orders from kings," John said. "They don't have to," Daenerys said. "They only have to see the dead and decide they'd rather side with the living." "They already have," John said. "Or most. The rest can stay in their caves and watch the sky burn from far away." "Naida." "How many can we spare?" Robb asked. "As many as we can and still hold the wall," John said. 300? 4? More if the dragons make a difference in defense." "They will," Daenerys said. "Drogon's fire melts stone. Ice won't fare better." "Then we plan," Robb said. "We take the best of the North's riders, the hardiest of the South's volunteers, wildlings who know the ice. You're unsullied." "Half," Daenerys said. "I need the rest to keep Meereen from eating itself while I'm gone." "Half, then," Robb said. "We go north. We cut the heart out of winter." "And if it is not a heart we can cut?" Davos asked. "Then we stab it until it stops moving," Arya said. "That's what I do." John grinned despite everything. "Nice to see some things haven't changed," he said. Under the table, Robb's hand brushed the dragonglass dagger at his belt. It was a short, ugly thing, black and dull, nothing like the shining Valyrian steel he'd once dreamed of owning. It was, perhaps, the most important blade in the world. He thought of all the battles that had led them here, of all the near misses where he had nearly died, nearly failed, nearly broken his word. He thought of Bran under the tree, of Sansa at Winterfell, of his mother's face as she had ridden south that first desperate time, refusing to crack. This would be the last battle that mattered, he thought. Not for thrones, not for castles, for breath. He did not know, yet, whether the world would remember it as victory or only as the place where they had made their stand. Either way, his northern armies would go with him, and they would win or fall together. They left Eastwatch at dawn a week later, when the sky was pale as bone and the sea ice crackled beside them. The host was smaller than any Robb had led before, but harder. Black brothers in patched cloaks walked alongside wildlings in furs and bone. Northern riders led spare horses riderless, their breath smoking. Unsullied marched in perfect formation, their spears gleaming faintly. Above them, the dragons circled, rarely together, more often as scattered shadows, hunting in wide loops. The further north they went, the less the land resembled anything human. The ground rolled in frozen swells, ice over stone. Here and there a stand of dead trees clawed at the sky. The air itself felt thinner, as if they were climbing some invisible slope. At night they made fires when they could, huddling behind ice hummocks to cut the wind. Men told stories in low voices, trading tales of summer heat and green fields to keep their teeth from chattering. Robb shared a blanket with Jon one night, their backs to the same snowbank, breath misting together. Above them, the aurora burned faint green and purple, like a weirwood sap turned to sky. "You remember," Jon murmured, "when we thought going north of the wall meant chasing a few wildlings, and maybe seeing a tree that looked funny?" "We were idiots," Robb said. "We were children," Jon corrected. "Same thing," Robb said. Jon was quiet for a moment. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Calling the banners, taking the crown, doing all this instead of staying in the wolf den and letting the lions tear at each other?" "Sometimes," Robb said. "In dreams. In the mornings after I wake up from those, I miss being just a Stark boy in Winterfell so much it hurts." He paused. "But then I walk the yard and see our people alive who would be dead otherwise. Or I get a letter from some village on the Trident that finally had a harvest not burned by war. Or Bran sends me one of his bloody cryptic ravens about how the tree roots are humming less angrily. And I think, if it wasn't me, it'd have had to be someone. And I'd rather it be someone. And I'd rather it be someone who keeps Jon huffed. "Humble, aren't you?" "Terribly," Robb said. "I've been told it's my most annoying trait." Jon snorted. "No, that's your habit of winning arguments by being right." Robb smiled into the dark. "You can blame Father for that." "I do," Jon said easily. Daenerys lay not far away, wrapped in furs, Drogon's enormous head resting near her feet like a monstrous hound's. His breath steamed in long, slow gusts. In sleep, his lip twitched, showing a flash of teeth. She dreamed of fire and ice. Not the simple kind she had known, campfires and desert nights, dragon's breath and the occasional flurry. This was older. In her dreams, she walked on a river that was half frozen, half molten, every step sending cracks in one direction and sparks in the other. On the river's bank stood two trees. One, a weirwood, its leaves red as blood. The other, a black and twisted thing that wept sap like tar. Between them, a man in armor of fog watched her with eyes she could not quite see. "Who are you?" she asked. "I am what happens when men think they can bind the storm," he said. His voice was like wind over ice. "When they make bargains with things they do not understand. When they forget that some powers do not like cages. Men. Na. You're another," she said. "I was a man once," he said. "King, husband, father. I wanted to keep my people safe. The children offered me a throne in winter. I thought it would make me strong enough to hold back the night." His head tilted. "I was wrong." Anger flared in her. "Then why do you march on us?" she demanded. "If you were a man, if you remember, Why do you kill the living? Because that is what I am now, he said simply. Because I am hungry. Because what they bound me to eats and is never full. Because when you put a fire in a box, it doesn't stop burning. It eats the box. Nani? Not no. Then let us burn you, she said. He smiled, a thin, cold thing. If you can find me, he said. She woke with her heart hammering. Drogon's eye was open, the slitted pupil fixed on her face. I know, she whispered, laying her hand on his scale. We'll find him. On the Isle of Faces, Bran stirred. He had seen that dream too, the echo of a man who had made a bargain and become a monster. He had seen other versions of that face in other branches. One where he fell to a single stroke of Valyrian steel. One where he killed Daenerys atop the wall. One where his own, Bran's, hands had given him some twisted mercy. This time the path was different. Dragons and wolves walked together toward that cold heart. You meddle, Leaf said, not without affection. I am doing what the children once did, Bran said. Trying to keep the world from tearing itself apart. And look how well that went for them, Leaf said. Bran said nothing. He sank his sight into the ice ahead of the host, searching for that deep, aching sense of wrong, the place where the cold sang. He found it 3 days later. The land rose where it should not have, a low swell in the endless white, like the back of some buried beast. At its center stood a ring of trees, not dead, but something worse. Their bark was white, like weirwoods, but their leaves were black, crackling, rimed with frost on the underside. No faces were carved in them. Their presence made the air shiver. Around that ring marched a patrol of white shapes, the others themselves, tall and thin. Their armor a blend of frost and glass. Between the trees, the air wavered, as if something were slowly breathing there that the eye could not see. There, Bran whispered, riding a raven's wings down toward Jon's camp. There. When the raven landed on Jon's shoulder, he did not flinch this time. He merely tilted his head, listening, hand resting on Ghost's back. How many? He asked quietly. Enough, Bran said. But not all. The heart is sleeping, waking. I don't know. It feels wrong, like ice over deep water. Then, can it be broken? Jon asked. Yes, Bran said, but not by just anyone. Jon's jaw tightened. Who? You, Bran said. And Daenerys and Robb, all of you together. Old blood, new fire. Jon rubbed a hand over his face. You do like making things complicated, he muttered. Better than impossible, Bran said. For what it's worth, in most worlds, you never get this far. For what it's worth, Jon said. In most worlds, you can stop talking about most worlds. The raven cackled. Ghost huffed, as if in agreement. Jon went to find Robb and Daenerys. The battle at the Night's Heart did not fall into neat lines. There was no wall to stand on, no gate to defend, no fortification to anchor their backs. Only endless snow, a biting wind, and that wrongness ahead, radiating cold. They approached in the half-light before dawn, when the stars were fading and the sky was a pale smudge overhead. The dragons flew ahead, their shapes black against the weak light. The first volley of the other's ice javelins took Rhaegal in the wing. Daenerys felt the impact like a shock through her own bones, though she rode Drogon. Rhaegal shrieked and dropped, one wing folding, spiraling toward the ground. Men scattered beneath, diving into the snow as his bulk hit with an earth-shaking crash. Down, Daenerys shouted. Drogon banked, beating hard, snow whipping around them. They landed in a spray of ice and white dust. The front ranks of the human host had already closed with the dead. Whites swarmed like ants, their numbers impossible to count. The others moved among them, their pale blades cutting through living flesh with terrifying ease. Robb rode at the head of the northern line, Grey Wind's descendant howling at his side. His sword, common steel, shattered on the first clash with another, the blade breaking in two like cheap glass. He dropped it without thinking and pulled the dragon glass dagger from his belt. The next time the pale thing's blade met his, it slid and caught, and then the dagger sank into cold flesh. For a heartbeat, the other's ice-blue eyes locked with his, full of something that was not quite hate and not quite fear. Then the thing shattered, fragments of frost exploding outward. "Dragon glass!" someone shouted. "Aim for the eyes." John fought at Robb's shoulder, long claws, Valyrian steel moving in sure, deadly arcs. The sword sang with each strike, black ripples running through its pale blade. Where it touched the others, they broke. "We need to get to the trees," John shouted over the din, pointing with the sword toward the ring of wrong white trunks. Bran says the heart is there. The problem was not seeing their goal. It was surviving long enough to reach it. White surged around them. Men went down and rose again within heartbeats, eyes gone blue. Wildlings bellowed war cries. Unsullied held their lines within human discipline, their spears a forest of sharp points. Above, Drogon screamed and loosed a torrent of fire. The flame washed over the front ranks of the dead, turning them into a wall of ash and bone. It hit one of the others full on. For a second, the creature glowed white-hot, a statue of ice illuminated from within. Then it burst, shards flying. The ring of trees flared in the fire's reflection, black leaves twisting. Daenerys clung to Drogon's back, fingers numb around the ridges of his neck. The cold gnawed at her, even through the dragon's heat. It felt like someone pressing needles into the bones of her face. She saw the ring, saw the shimmer at its center. Something in her blood stirred. "Closer!" she shouted into Drogon's ear. He hesitated. She felt his reluctance, his dislike of the cold, his instinct to stay high and burn from a distance. "Closer," she said again. "Please." He obeyed. They swooped low over the ring. The air above the trees was wrong. It crackled, making her teeth ache. A javelin of pure ice hissed past her cheek, so close she could feel its chill. She saw the shape within the ring then, a figure on a throne of packed snow and twisted roots, armor like the surface of a frozen lake. His eyes were colder than anything she had ever seen. The man from her dreams. He lifted his hand. The air around him wavered. Drogon screamed, flailing in the air as something unseen struck him. Daenerys felt her dragon's panic, his sudden desperation to be away from that cold. She tightened her legs, forced herself to stay seated. "Now," Bran whispered in her ear, though he was miles away in a tree. "Now, Dany. Fire and ice together." "Nah. Nah. Robb," she screamed, voice ripping her throat. "Jon!" On the ground, fighting through whites 3 deep, they heard. Robb looked up, eyes burning, face streaked with blood and sweat and melted frost. "Can you get us there?" he shouted to Jon. Jon's grin was feral, teeth white and a face gone almost blue with cold. "I've walked worse," he said. They broke through the line together, long claw and dragon glass cutting a path. Wildlings closed in behind them, hacking, roaring. Tormund Giantsbane took a blow meant for Robb, his red beard frosting with blood. Unsullied filled gaps, their spears punching precise holes in the whites' bodies. Every step was a fight. Every breath burned. They reached the ring as Drogon bellowed again, flame building. The others guarding the trees moved, blades rising. Robb and Jon plunged into them. Valyrian steel met ice. Dragonglass plunged. The air filled with the sound of things breaking. Metal, frost, bone, old oaths. Daenerys saw them from above, 2 small figures in a sea of white and dark. She saw the ring of trees, the figure on the throne, the way the air shimmered around him like heat over a desert road. She felt something deep and old under her skin, the way she had when she walked into Khal Drogo's pyre and did not die. "Now," Bran whispered again. "Daenerys, now." She stood on Drogon's back. It was madness. The dragon bucked under her, wings beating, javelins hissing past. The cold tore at her lungs. She had never stood like this before, never risked letting go of the ridges. She let go. For a heartbeat she was falling, nothing beneath her but air and snow, and the weight of every choice that had led her here. Then she spoke a word in a language that tasted of ash and old blood and command. "Dracarys," she said. The fire that came then was not like Drogon's usual blaze. It was thinner, wider, hotter. It speared downward in a single concentrated column, hitting the center of the ring. The trees shrieked, not with voices but with the sound of sap boiling, of frost cracking. The throne of snow seethed. The figure upon it raised his arms, as if to ward it off. Robb and Jon threw themselves forward together. Longclaw and the dragonglass dagger met in the center of that white fire. For an instant, steel and stone and flame and ice all touched the thing that had been a man, and was now a wound in the world. Bran's consciousness was there too, threaded through the roots, his own cry joining. It was like shoving his hands into a fire and a glacier at once. Pain lanced through him, through them, through the thing on the throne. The Night King, if such he had ever been, screamed without sound. His armor shattered, his flesh cracked. His eyes, those cold knives, flared and then went out. The ring of trees exploded, sending shards of bark and ice and blackened leaf into the air. The ground bucked. Men and whites alike went down. Then there was a sound like a great sigh. All across the field, the whites stopped moving. One by one, they collapsed, stringless puppets. The light went out of their eyes. Some fell with limbs stiff. Others simply crumpled, as if whatever had been holding them up had finally let go. The remaining others, those not yet cut down, looked toward the shattered ring. For a heartbeat, something like pure, clean horror crossed their faces. Then they too cracked, lines running through them like ice in spring. They burst into shards, falling like sleet. Silence fell. It was total. No moans, no clash of metal, no roar of dragons. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Robb lay on his back in the snow, chest heaving, every nerve screaming. His hand still clutched the dragonglass dagger. Its blade was gone. Only the hilt remained, blackened and cracked. Beside him, Jon coughed, rolled over and pushed himself up on shaky arms. Longclaw lay in the snow, its pale steel now threaded with a faint dark vein where it had touched the heart. Daenerys knelt a few paces away, hands pressed into the snow, hair burnt in places, cheeks blistered with cold and heat both. Drogon crouched behind her, wings mantled, eyes wide. "Is it done?" Jon rasped. Robb rolled his head toward the shattered ring. Where the throne had been was now a crater, blackened and steaming. The wrongness in the air was gone. It felt empty. Clean, in a way. Terrible, but clean. Bran's voice came faintly, as if from very far away. "Yes," he said. "For now." Robb let out a breath that sounded disturbingly like a sob. He didn't care. He lay there for a long moment, snowflakes melting on his face, listening to the new silence. Then, slowly, men began to move. A cheer went up somewhere, ragged and disbelieving. Another answered it. Wildlings whooped. Brothers of the Watch stared at their hands as if they'd forgotten what to do with them. Daenerys raised her head. Her eyes met Robb's across the ruin. "You see?" She whispered, voice raw. "Not conquering, not burning cities. This is what dragons are for." Robb nodded once. His throat was too tight for speech. In the roots of the world, Bran sagged back against the tree. "You'll sleep for days," Leaf said, not unkindly, as she dabbed sap from his forehead. "You pushed hard." "I had to," Bran whispered. "This was the worst one, the branch with the most weight." "And now?" Leaf asked. "What will you do, O chooser of paths?" Bran closed his eyes. "Let them walk without me," he said. "For a while." Leaf smiled. "Good," she said. "Even trees must rest between storms." Years later, when old men in smoky halls told children about the last hunt, for so they named that march into the north, once they could bear to make it into a story. They argued about when the victory had truly been won. Some said it was when the Night King shattered under dragonfire and dragonglass. Some said it was when the first dragon flew over the wall. Some, stubborn northerners with less interest in dragons, said it was when a Stark boy had knelt at a tree and asked the gods to keep him honest. Robb Stark, if pressed, would say it was when they chose not to kill each other first. He lived to be old, older than he had expected, gray in the beard and scarred in ways that made children stare. He walked slower in the end, but he still liked to stand on Winterfell's walls in the evenings, watching the way the light faded over the godswood. Sometimes he saw shadows in the branches that looked like a boy climbing, like a direwolf among the roots. Sometimes, when the wind was right, he thought he heard Bran's laugh. Daenerys came north from Dragonstone often, dragons less terrifying to men now that they had seen them burn not cities, but ice. She never sat the Iron Throne. The realm never quite asked her to. Instead, she was a queen in the east and a guest in the west. A woman half made of story who could sit by a Winterfell fire and argue with Sansa about grain tariffs. Jon stayed at the wall. It was his choice. He could have left, many said. He had done enough. But he knew, better than any, that walls needed watchers even when no enemies pressed them. Especially then, he told Arya once, as they walked the parapet together. That's when men get careless. And when they get stupid, she said. And when they start fighting over chairs again, he said. She laughed, short and sharp. We've fewer chairs now, she said. More tables. That's what we did it for, Jon said. Tables? She asked. People sitting around them instead of bleeding on fields, he said. It's not as exciting, but it's better. She bumped his shoulder with hers. You're getting old, she said. So are you, he said. Never, she replied. The children of those who had fought at the Night's Heart grew up on stories of dragons and kings and a winter that had nearly never ended. Some of them turned those stories into plays. Some rolled their eyes at their elders and went to work in fields or ships or counting houses instead. The Seven Kingdoms were never truly seven again. They were more like a handful of rocks in a cloth bag, tied together loosely. The North and Trident under the Starks, the South under whoever could keep Stannis' hard standard from falling, Dorne doing as it always had, the Reach feeding everyone and grumbling, the Iron Islands occasionally remembering to behave. Above them all, often visible on clear days, dragons wheeled, shadows crossing sun. In the end, the wheel did not break. It changed shape. It became something more like a web, threads crossing and anchoring, held together not by one hub, but by many. Easier to tear in places, perhaps, but also harder to shatter all at once. In a quiet grove on the Isle of Faces, Bran Stark watched it all with eyes older than his years. He still nudged, sometimes, when something seemed about to tilt toward disaster. A dream here, a raven's odd behavior there. But more often he simply watched, letting men make their own mistakes, trusting that they would live with them. That is new, Leaf said once, surprised. You trusting men. I've seen enough worlds where I didn't, he said. They always end the same, with me as a root and nothing else. Leaf laughed. And now? And now there are dragons flying over Winterfell, he said. And children in King's Landing who have never seen a man hanged for telling the truth. And a boy in White Harbor who will grow up thinking wildlings are just people. That's enough. It will not last forever, Leaf said gently. Nothing does. Bran smiled, small and knowing. Nothing, he agreed, except the stories. He watched as a little girl in Winterfell's yard picked up a stick and declared herself Queen of Dragonstone, while her friends shouted that he was king in the north, and their third companion, a boy with hair as black as a raven's wing, rolled his eyes and declared himself lord of nothing and quite content. Thank you. They swung their sticks, laughed, chased each other through the late snow. Above them, a dragon passed. shadow falling over the yard for a moment before moving on. The children paused, looked up, then went back to their game. That, more than battles, more than treaties and crowns and councils, was the victory. Not that Robb Stark's northern armies had won every battle across every timeline, though they had where it counted, but that they had made a world in which children could play at war under a sky that, for once, did not look ready to fall. Pa. Robb Stark woke to the sound of rain on slate and the soft, patient knock of a steward at his door. He lay for a moment in the dimness, listening. The rain drummed on the shuttered window, a slow, heavy sound that spoke of warm southern weather, not the thin sleet of the north. His head ached. He had not slept well. Dreams had chased him along the edge of waking. Fire on black water, the creak of old iron, Bran's voice murmuring from the roots of the world. Your Grace. The knock came again, more tentative this time. The hour is near. Robb pushed himself upright with a quiet curse. The bed in the Tower of the Hand was softer than his pallet in Winterfell, stuffed with goose down instead of straw. It swallowed him when he lay down, and when he rose it clung to him with a traitor's grip. He almost missed the hard northern boards. Come, he called. The steward entered, a boy scarcely older than Bran had been when he fell, cheeks flushed with nerves. He held out a fresh tunic, dark gray with silver stitching at the collar, the direwolf of House Stark picked in white on the breast. The boy's eyes flicked again and again to Robb's face, then away. It's only rain, Robb said, swinging his legs over the side and reaching for the cup of water on the bedside table. It won't melt me. Yes, Your Grace, the boy said, sounding mortified as if he'd offended. Robb sighed inwardly. King in the North or not, he had never quite grown used to the way southern servants flinched and fawned. In Winterfell, a steward might call him Your Grace, but he'd also tell him if his boots were on the wrong feet. He dressed quickly, letting the boy fuss with the clasps at his shoulders, only long enough to avoid hurting the lad's feelings. When the door closed behind the steward, he went to the window and pushed the shutters open. King's Landing lay below, washed clean by the spring rain. The red roofs gleamed darker, the cobbled streets shining like snakes. Smoke rose from 1,000 chimneys, mingling with the mist. The sept of Baelor's white dome loomed to the left. The broken top of the ruined dragon pit frowned over the city from its hill. Far beyond, the sea was a gray smear. Above it all, dragons moved, slow and distant shadows beneath the clouds. They had arrived 2 days ago, the 3 great beasts circling once around the city before gliding down to roost on the reinforced ledges carved into Aegon's high hill. The small folk had poured into the streets to gape, half in terror, half in glee. Some fell to their knees and prayed. Others shouted Daenerys' name as if she were some hero from an old children's tale who had finally stepped out of the story. Robb had watched from almost this same spot, feeling the great wing beats in his chest. No matter how many times he saw the dragons, he never entirely shook the sense that they'd stepped sideways into one of old Nan's wildest tales, and never come back. Brother. Arya's voice came from the doorway behind him, dry as old parchment. Robb turned. She leaned in the frame, hair damp from the rain, sword at her hip. She wore no court dress, only dark breeches and a simple tunic belted snug, a gray cloak thrown carelessly over one shoulder. In this place full of silks and brocades, she looked like a knife laid on a velvet cushion. You're an hour from sitting in a hall with every ambitious idiot in the realm, she said. And you're staring at the rain like it has something to tell you. That's never a good sign. The rain doesn't talk, Robb said. The roots do. Her mouth crooked. Bran? He dreamed again, Robb said. Sent a raven in the night. They woke me to read it. I'd swear the bird was laughing. What did he say? Arya asked. That today is a knot in the web, Robb said, turning back to the window. Pull the wrong strand and it tightens around our throats. Pull the right one and everything's easier to hold. A helpful little tree, our Bran, Arya said. Anything more particular? Don't sit on the sharp chair, brother, it'll bite your arse. He says today is about endings. Not beginnings, Robb said. About what we choose to keep and what we let go. Arya snorted. He's been spending too long with leaves and old songs. Sounds like something a Septon would say. He says Stannis' heart is failing, Robb added. That silenced her for a beat. She came closer to the window, looking down at the city. The rain beaded on her lashes. He looked well enough last night, she said. Well as Stannis ever looks. Less likely to murder his courtiers than he used to, perhaps. Bran sees further than eyes, Robb said. He doesn't say it will be today. Only that it is soon. That whatever we decide in the Great Hall, we'd best be ready to live with when he's gone. Nah. Arya's jaw clenched. So that's what this is, she said. Not just the question of whether to keep the Iron Throne as a symbol. It's what we mean to be when the man on it isn't the one who won it. Robb said nothing. She was right, of course. 10 years had passed since the last hunt. 10 winters, shorter and kinder than the one that had nearly never ended. 10 summers, green and generous. Children had been born who had never seen a white's blue eyes. The scars in the land healed slowly. The scars in people faster in some places, painfully slower in others. Stannis had ruled from the Red Keep as King of the Seven Kingdoms, or what remained of that title. The North and the Trident were his allies, not his vassals. Dorne danced aside when it pleased and joined when it mattered. The Reach fed everyone with one hand and schemed with the other. The Iron Islands sulked and raided and worried Robb like a burr in the collar of his cloak. But for all his rigidity, for all his hard lines and harder judgments, Stannis Baratheon had kept the peace as much as any one man could. He'd cared for laws more than lords. He'd hanged more nobles than small folk. The small folk respected him, which in a city like King's Landing was as close to love as a hard man might get. Now his hair was white at the temples. The lines around his eyes were carved deep. His shoulders had bent, just a little. He was not a man who would willingly let go of anything once his teeth were in it. The question was less whether Stannis would release his grip and more what would be waiting beneath when he finally did. Shireen will be there, Arya said. So will Arianne. So will every lord who ever thought a soft girl in a chair was easier to push than a hard man. Shireen is not as soft as they think, Robb said. I know, Arya said. You know? Bran knows. Does Lord Tarly? The name made Robb's head ache more. Randall Tarly was not the only lord in the south who'd been quietly, bitterly resentful of the way the realm lay these days, but he was one of the loudest. The Tyrells still ruled the Reach, but the roses were fewer, and their thorns sharper since Massa's pride had been pruned by Stannis and the dragons both. The Great Council was my idea, Robb said. Stannis listened. Arianne sharpened it. If it goes badly. Arya nudged his shoulder with hers. If it goes badly, you'll still be king in the north, she said. We'll still have winter stores and thick walls. Dragons will still fly. The world won't end because a few southerners can't agree which chair they like best. That's precisely how the world nearly ended last time, Robb said. She shrugged. Last time we had no dragons, no Bran in a tree, no pact between crowns. We have more threads now, harder to snap all at once. Robb breathed out slowly. You sound like him sometimes. Bran. When you talk about threads. Arya's mouth twitched. Someone has to translate him. He's all roots and riddles these days. He looked once more at the rain-smeared city, then turned away. Come on, he said. Let's go untie a knot. The great hall of the Red Keep smelled of candle wax, damp stone, and 100 varieties of perfume. Banners hung from its walls, the crowned stag and flaming heart most prominent, the sun and spear of Dorne beside it, the rose of Tyrell, the dire wolf of Stark, the trout of Tully. The three-headed dragon of Targaryen had been restored to its old place high on the rear wall, above the Iron Throne itself. The throne looked different now than it had in the days of the Mad King and his son. The blades were still there, a tangle of steel and jagged points, but they'd been reshaped slightly, the highest, most menacing spikes cut down. Stannis had refused to sit on a chair that stabbed him in the back whenever he leaned. The smiths had grumbled, but the thing was a little less like a threat now, a little more like a seat. Still, it loomed. At its foot stood Stannis Baratheon, bareheaded and plain in a dark doublet with only the faintest gold on the cuffs. Arianne Martell sat in a chair beside him, her gown a blaze of Dornish color, her hair bound back with a thin circlet of sunbright metal. Renly lounged a step below, in a seat that had once been called the Hand's Chair, and now was simply theirs. Brother, uncle, marshal, buffer. The hall was full. Lords and ladies from all parts of the realm gathered in uneasy clusters. The Northmen with their dark wool and simple lines, Reachmen in embroidered splendor, stony Dornish with sun-browned faces, Stormlords with weathered hands and stiff collars. Behind Robb, the murmur of their voices rose and fell like a sea. Daenerys stood to his left, Drogon visible through the high, open windows behind the throne, sunlight gleaming on black scales. She wore no crown, only a slender chain around her neck with 3 small dragon heads, one black, one green, one cream and gold. Her eyes were clear and bright, taking in every face. On Robb's right, Sansa stood with the northern banner in her hand. Her hair was braided in a crown around her head, streaked with the first threads of silver at the temples, a sign of years and cares, not frailty. She met looks from the southern lords with the calm of someone who had once been a frightened girl in this hall, and now came as the one who kept another king's realm steady in his absence. Stannis lifted a hand. The noise in the hall died. "We are not here to choose a new king," he said. His voice, though roughened by age, still carried easily. "I still draw breath. The gods have not seen fit to relieve me of the burden of this crown yet." A ripple of uneasy laughter ran through the closer ranks. Stannis' mouth twitched, almost a smile. "We are here," he went on, "to decide what happens when they do." He let that sink in. "When I took this throne," he said, "it was wreathed in lies, held by the blood of a madman's children, then by a boy who thought cruelty was strength. I took it because the law said it was mine. I have kept it because the realm needed someone who cared more for law than for comfort." His jaw clenched briefly. "I will not hold it forever. No man does. No woman either. We bleed, we rot, we fall. What matters is whether the thing we leave behind is worth the blood men spilled to keep it." He looked at Robb and Daenerys briefly, then at Shireen, standing near the dais with her shoulders back and her burn-scarred cheek bare. "I have a daughter," he said. "By all the laws that men have written, she is my heir. By all the logic that the gods seem to favor, she will not find it easy. She bears my name, but not my disposition. Some of you can hardly wait to test how much you can push her." A few lords shifted, caught. "I will not change that law today," Stannis said. "Shireen Baratheon is my heir. When I die, she will be queen, if the gods and her own strength will it. That is not what we are here to debate." Lord Tarly's mouth thinned. Robb saw his hand clench briefly on the hilt of his sword. "What we are here to decide," Stannis said, "is what kind of realm she inherits. What kind of realm your sons and daughters will inherit." Arianne rose then, her sun-bright eyes scanning the hall. "We live now in a patchwork," she said. "The North is its own kingdom. Dorne has its old rights. The Iron Islands sulk under their rocks. The Reach and Stormlands and Vale and Westerlands look more to their own neighbors than to the capital. For 10 years that patchwork has held. Barely." Her smile was quick and sharp, often because dragons flew overhead. Daenerys inclined her head slightly. "We can go on that way," Arianne said. "Loose threads, frayed edges, everyone half suspicious of everyone else, holding together because it is easier than breaking apart. Or we can admit what we are and make something from it that does not depend on one man's will." Pantaya. Renly stood, biting into an apple as if he owned the place, then tossing the core to the floor. "My brother wants law," he said. "The North wants safety. Dorne wants pride. The Reach wants to keep counting their coin. The dragons want a sky that doesn't fill with arrows every time they flap. None of that is impossible to arrange, but it does mean letting go of a few pretty lies. His gaze slid to the Iron Throne. The hall followed it. For 300 years, he said. That chair has been the heart of the 7 kingdoms. Men said so, so it was so. King on the throne, realm obedient. Except it never really was. Before Aegon, we were 7 kings gnawing at each other's borders. After him, we were 7 lords pretending to smile at one man's table while we sharpened knives under their napkins. The chair didn't change that. It just made our fights bloodier when they came. A murmur ran through the hall, disapproving and thoughtful in equal measure. I like chairs, Renly said. Chairs are comfortable, but I don't think we need one that reminds us every day how many men died for it. Nah. Shireen stepped forward then. Her hair was bound back in a simple knot. The patch on her cheek was gone, the grayscale scars pale against her skin. She wore a gown of dark blue and gold, the 7-pointed star at her throat, and the flaming heart of Aralor embroidered small at one cuff, a sign of compromise she had insisted on herself. She had a book in one hand, closed. When I was a girl, she said, I sat in this hall and watched Joffrey Baratheon have a man's head cut off for telling the truth. Her voice did not tremble. He sat that throne as if it made him a god. It didn't. It only made his cruelty taller. No one moved. Robb felt the hush sink into his bones. I have sat it too, Shireen said. Only for ceremonies. Once when my father went to war and left me here. It jabbed my back. It has killed more kings than I can count. My uncles. My cousin. Men I never knew and some I wish I hadn't. Nay. She looked up at the blades, at the twisted metal that had once been 7 score swords and more. My Lord Father is right, she said. Law is not a chair. Law is words on parchment and the strength to hold to them. The realm is not a chair. It is rivers and fields and the people in them. She drew a breath, hand tightening on the book. I will not sit a throne that exists mostly to make us kill each other, she said. Not alone. Not alone. Not as the only thing that binds us. If I am to be queen, I would rather sit a smaller chair at a larger table. Mai. The words hung in the damp air. Robb watched faces change around him. Some hardened, affronted. Others softened, hopeful. Some simply looked bewildered. Our proposal is this, Arianne said into the silence. We retire the Iron Throne as the sole symbol of power in this realm. It can stand as a reminder, if you like, a piece of history. Her mouth twisted. Or it can be melted down. We have no lack of need for plowshares and hinges. No. That brought a rough chuckle from a few northerners and an outright cough of outrage from somewhere in the Reach. In its place, she went on, we make something new. A council of kings and queens. The king in the north. The queen of Dragonstone and the eastern cities she holds. The queen of the south, Shireen. The prince or princess of Dorne. The lords paramount of the Vale, the Reach, the Stormlands, the Westerlands, and the Iron Islands if they choose to join us. Each with a voice. Each bound by treaty to one another's defense. None with the right to march through the other's lands without consent, except when the dead come again. And by all gods, let's hope they don't. Renly smiled. Call it a web if you like, he said. A net, harder to snap, harder for one man's madness to tear. And when these kings and queens quarrel, Lord Tarley demanded, his voice carrying. When your council cannot agree where to send grain, when dragons burn fields by accident, when the North refuses some southern tax. What then? We have no recourse now but war. Robb stepped forward. Then we write the rules down, he said. All of them, not just who inherits which seat, but what each crown owes the others, and what they owe their people. What they may and may not do. If I ever raise northern banners to march south for my own glory, I want every man from the wall to the arbor to be able to point to a parchment and call me Oathbreaker. Murmurs again. Some startled, some approving. It will be slow, Robb said. Messy. High. We'll argue, and some of you will ignore it when it suits you. We're not fools. We know a piece of parchment doesn't stop a sword, but it gives men another way to fight before they reach for one. Nay. He paused, letting his gaze rest on faces he knew. Manderley's broad, watchful. Doran Martell's thin and thoughtful. The Tyrelliers composed. Even Randall Tarla's tight and skeptical. When I marched south to free my father, he said, there was no law to restrain Joffrey. No treaty he'd signed that gave us any recourse but war. He sat a chair made of swords and thought that gave him the right to do as he liked. The world nearly ended in fire and ice because of it. Mengna. He thought briefly of alternate visions Bran had shown him. Himself dead at a feast, the north shattered, dragons burning King's Landing while the Night King walked. We don't have to keep doing that, Robb said. We can be better. Daenerys came to stand beside him then. Her presence drew every eye. My father built that chair higher with wildfire, she said. My brother dreamed of it more than he did of food. My family hurt the world to keep it. So did yours. Her eyes swept the hall, daring anyone to deny it. You used it as an excuse to wreck each other. You wrapped your sins in its shadow and called that destiny. She rested her palm lightly on the pommel of the sword at her hip. We broke the long night together, she said. We burned the heart of winter and lived. That is what dragons are for. That is what kings and queens are for. Not this. She nodded toward the throne. If we keep it, let it be as a warning, not a prize. Shireen stepped up to it then. She set the book in her hand on the floor at its base. It fell open, pages splaying. I will not sit this alone, she said. If we melt it, I will not weep. If we keep it, I will sit it only as one voice among many. Her hand brushed the cold metal. Robb felt a faint shiver go through the hall like a draft. In the godswood of Winterfell, the heart tree's carved face wept a thin line of sap. On the Isle of Faces, Bran Stark opened his eyes. He had seen other councils and other branches, one where the lords laughed at Shireen, where Stannis died clutching his crown, and the realm tore itself apart again, dragons and wolves, and roes and all clawing at one another's throats. One where a dragon queen took the throne in fire, and the Iron Throne melted under her fury, only for lesser thrones to spring up everywhere, each with its own pile of bones. This one felt different. It's your choice, Leaf said beside him. You could whisper fear into one man's dream, pride into another's. You could make them reach for their swords instead of their ink. I won't, Bran said softly. Because you trust them? Leaf asked, amused. Because if I don't, Bran said, then nothing we've done matters. The point wasn't to keep my brother alive so that I could rule through him. The point was to give men the chance to choose something other than ruin. Leaf watched him for a while, then nodded, satisfaction in her ageless face. Good, she said. You are beginning to sound like a tree after all. In the hall, for a long moment, no one spoke. Then Doran Martell shifted, the faintest rustle of his robes. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but the hall heard it. Dorne will sign such a pact, he said. We remember too well what happens when one throne tries to rule us all. Write the charter. We will send our ink. Murmurs. Lord Manderley nodded, his many chins wobbling. The North already lives by half those rules, he said. Might as well put them on paper. Old Town will resist, muttered a plump, sharp-eyed lord in a reach cloak. The Citadel likes its precedents. They can write new ones, Renly said. It'll give them something to do with all those candles. Randall Tarley's hand tightened again on his sword, then eased. The Reach will sign, he said grudgingly. Better a clear chart than a foggy river. But I'll not have it turn into some council where small folk shout down their betters. Lords rule. That's the way of it. Nah. Lords rule so long as their people don't hang them, Arya muttered under her breath. Sansa hid a smile. Lords rule, Daenerys said aloud. So long as they remember what that means. We're not proposing to put cobblers on this council, Lord Tarly. Only to make sure no one lord can drag all of the rest into war whenever he wakes up in a temper. More voices now. The Vale's lord declared cautiously that he saw sense in a charter. The Ironborn delegate, Asha Greyjoy, sharp as ever, said she'd sign anything that kept Southerners off her rocks and left her some ships. And if one of these kings breaks your beloved parchment, a lesser Westerland's lord demanded, his beard neat, his cloak carefully plain now that golden lions were no longer fashionable. What then? You march dragons every time a clause is bent? Daenerys' smile was small and edged. Once, she said. Let it be once, and no one will test it twice. That drew some nervous laughter, but also a sense of something relaxing, just a little. Fear of dragons was a real thing. Used properly, it could be law's ally rather than its enemy. Stannis had been quiet throughout, watching. Now, he stepped forward. I have fought more than I ever wished, he said. I have burned more than I am proud of. I have sat that chair and felt the way it whispers. More. More land, more law, more obedience. He looked up at the twisted blades. Perhaps it is time we stopped listening to it, he said. Write your charter. Sign your names. When the gods see fit to drag me down to hell, Shearing will sit not as the only voice that matters, but as one among many. He spat on the floor, as if at his own folly. Take the cursed thing down, he said brusquely to the nearest guards. But carefully, he added at Ariane's sharp glance. No sense killing anyone with it on the way out. A low, astonished roar went through the hall. Men craned their necks. Women rose on tiptoe. Small folk in the back surged forward. Under everyone's eyes, the Iron Throne was unbolted from the dais. It took 12 strong men and a wary dragon overhead to move it. The sound of scraping metal echoed in the hall like the ending of an age. They carried it out and into the rain. Robb followed, not because it was required, but because he wanted to see. On the hill before the ruined dragon pit, a great forge had been built. Bellows pumped. Coals glowed. Rain hissed on hot iron. The blacksmiths of King's Landing and Dragonstone and Winterfell and Meereen all worked there under the eye of a squat, scarred man with arms like tree trunks. Gendry Baratheon, now Lord of Storm's End in name, though he still preferred the forge to the hall, wiped sweat from his brow and squinted at the monstrosity his men bore. Too sharp by half, he muttered. Ugly work. Men and their pride. You're about to turn it into pots and hinges, Arya said at his elbow. You must be pleased. Not pots, he said. Better things. But I'll remember not to make the next king's seat out of blades if anyone's foolish enough to ask. Daenerys came to stand beside Robb. The rain beaded on her hair, ran down her cheeks. Drogon circled above once, then settled on the far side of the hill, watching with unblinking eyes. Are you sure? Gendry asked her. And Stannis and Shireen. This is history. History nearly killed us, Shireen said, her hands clenched. Melt it. Gendry nodded and signaled to his men. They fed the throne into the forge piece by piece. It took hours. The steel screamed as it went. The rain steamed. The crowd thinned, then thickened again as word spread through the city that the old symbol of kingship was being unmade. When the first melted metal poured into the waiting molds, there was a hush. What will you make? Robb asked Gendry quietly. Gendry jerked his chin toward a half-finished thing under a canvas. That, he said. Robb lifted the edge of the canvas. It was a table. Not a simple feasting board, but a great round thing, thick-planked, its surface already sanded smooth. The edges were carved with symbols, wheat sheaves, ships, swords, hammers, fish, wolves, dragons, stags, suns. There were no sharp points, no looming spikes. Only 13 chairs to go with it, each sturdy, each equal in height. Gendry looked almost embarrassed at Robb's expression. Renly came down, asked for it, he said. Said if we're going to have a council, we should do it sitting. Seems sense. People think better when their arses aren't getting stabbed. Robb laughed, sudden and real. Yes, he said. They do. He watched the molten metal pour, thinking not of swords but of hinges, of pen nibs, of plowshares. Bran watched too, far away. He saw other versions. The throne preserved as a relic, the throne shattered by mob, the throne rebuilt by some fool in a later age. He let those fade. This will not end war, he murmured to Leaf. No, she said. Men will still want what others have. They will still hate. They will still be afraid. But it will make war harder, Bran said. Less likely to be the first answer. Leaf tilted her head. You are young yet, she said. You think in firsts and lasts. That is all right. The world is old. It knows better than we do that nothing is ever truly ended. Bran thought of the Knight's heart, of the crater that lay there now, quiet and bare. He thought of the faint echo of cold that still lingered in that place, like a scar that ached when the weather changed. No, he said. Nothing is ended. But some things break so badly they take a long time to find their way back. No. He watched men and women gather around the new forged table days later, hands splayed on its surface, voices rising in argument and reluctant agreement. He watched Robb's patience and anger, Daenerys' fire and restraint, Shireen's calm, Arianne's cunning, Jon's occasional, weary visits, Samwell Tarly's shy suggestions from the Citadel seat, Asha's sardonic humor, Mace Tyrell's second son's careful calculations. I suppose, Bran said softly, almost to the tree itself, that this is what we were fighting for. Not a world without knots, just one where there's a chance to untie them without everyone choking. Winter came and went again. Years passed as years do. Children grew. Houses rose and fell. There were famines in some corners, feasts in others. There were small wars, skirmishes over borders, vendettas over insults, brief, sharp conflicts that flared and were contained by words and dragons and the weight of shared history. Robb Stark's hair went more gray. Lines carved themselves deeper at the corners of his eyes. He buried people he loved, as all men do. His mother, finally at peace under a weirwood's watchful face, old Lord Manderly, who died complaining that there had not been enough pies at his last feast, Grey John Umber, who went out laughing after breaking a sellsword's jaw in the yard at Sept. He watched his own children take their first steps in the Godswood, wolf pups tumbling around their feet. He watched them quarrel and make up, grow proud, make mistakes. He learned, slowly and without anyone putting it into words, that winning battles was easy compared to letting your children lose a few. He saw Daenerys return to Meereen, then to Dragonstone, then to the north again, dragons older and wiser each time. She never had a child of her own. The maesters muttered that whatever spell had birthed dragons in the fire had burned her womb. She poured that thwarted love into her cities, her freedmen, her dragons, and into the young Starks and Martells and Manderlys and Baratheons and Sandsnakes who swarmed under her cloak when she visited, eyes wide at the dragons. You're getting old, she told Robb once, on the wall, watching the sun set over an empty, silent north. Her hair was silver shot with white now, braided back simply. So are you, he said. She smiled, slow and wry. Not so much, she said. Fire burns slower than ice. He laughed. Do you regret it? She asked after a while. Any of it? He knew which it she meant. The throne melted, the councils, the endless, wearying arguments, the compromises that left no one entirely happy. Sometimes, he said honestly, when I have to sit through 4 hours of men debating whose sheep grazed on whose side of a stream, while dragons circle overhead and Bran whispers in my dreams that there's a storm coming in 3 years' time that will wash half those sheep away anyway. She snorted. But mostly, he said, no, I regret the people I lost, the lives I ordered spent. I regret that I could not save everyone Bran shows me. But this This is better than the worlds where I died, Danny. You should see them. The ones where you burned it all. The ones where you never came. Nah, I don't too, she said softly. Let them stay dead. He nodded. On the Isle of Faces, Bran smiled faintly. He saw further still sometimes. He saw generations beyond his brother, beyond Daenerys, beyond Shireen. He saw a world where the wall was more a monument than a defense, visited by children with sticks and songs. He saw one where men forgot the long night again, because that is what men do, and where some fool in a far-off age decided that a throne made of something other than swords would be a good idea after all. He did not despair. Stories, he had come to understand, were the way the world remembered its lessons. They faded, yes, and were misremembered, and turned into songs about brave men and pretty women that left out the mud and the fear. But they left shapes in people's minds, and somewhere in those shapes, the shadow of a round table and a melted throne lingered. Time moved, as it always had. In Winterfell, on a day when the snow fell in lazy, fat flakes and the smoke from the chimneys rose straight up into a pale sky, Robb Stark stood once more in the godswood with his hand on the heart tree. His knees ached a little as he knelt. His breathing came more slowly. Grey Wind was long dead, but his blood ran in lean, watchful wolves who moved through the trees beyond, their eyes shining. I think I'm done, Bran, he murmured. Not yet. But soon. I can feel it. My hands shake when I sign too many parchments. My sword arm is not what it was. The children, my children, Sansa's, Arya's, Strays, they're ready to take more. They're itching for it. The tree said nothing, but the wind shifted. Snowflakes pattered softly on the leaves. I kept my word, Robb said quietly. I tried anyway. I didn't turn this into a game for myself. I didn't use my crown to make myself taller. Most days, at least. He laughed under his breath. When I lose my temper at a council because some lord thinks his pride is worth 1,000 small folks' lives, you show me those other worlds, he said. The ones where I died. The ones where I broke my promises. The ones where winter won. I hate you for it sometimes. But it helps. No. He laid his forehead against the cold bark. I won every battle, Bran, he said very softly. But that doesn't matter, does it? Not the way I thought it would when I was 17. In the roots, Bran listened. Winning is just not losing yet, Robb said. I see that now. The only battles that matter are the ones where more of our children live than die, where more fields are planted than burned, where the dead stay dead. He drew a breath that shuddered faintly and let it out. Thank you, he said, surprising himself, for not letting me walk the wrong branch. The heart tree did not answer in words, but somewhere in the deep, tangled web of roots and memories, the Greenseer, who had once been Bran Stark, reached back along that connection and laid a hand, metaphorically, on his brother's bowed head. I only nudged, Bran murmured. You did the walking. Leaf, watching silently, smiled. Men, she said, always so quick to blame themselves for their failures, so slow to credit themselves for their successes. He was never slow, Bran said. Not Robb. He just didn't want to take credit for things that were not his alone. Nah, empty. Outside the Godswood in the yard, the children were playing again. Not the same children as 10 years ago, but others, Robb's grandchildren and their friends, bastards and trueborn, wildling and kneeler, a Dornish girl with sun-browned skin and a northern boy with hair like a thatch. I'm the North, one shouted, waving a stick. I'm Dragonstone, another cried, making a terrible roar. You can't both be dragons, a third put in. Some of us have to be small folk or the story makes no sense. Fine, said the Dornish girl. I'll be the one who jumps on the table and shouts until all the kings listen. They never do, said the boy with the thatch. They did once, she said. Old Nan says so. Old Nan's dead, another child pointed out. She left stories, the girl replied. Shut up and take your hiding. They clashed sticks, laughing. No one told them not to pretend. No one dragged them away in fear that someone would take their game too seriously. Above them, dragons wheeled, smaller now that some had flown east again, larger in other ways. The world was not at peace. It never would be. There were still wolves and krakens and lions of one sort or another. But for the span of Robb Stark's life, and Daenerys and Shireen's, and Joan's and Arya's and Sansa's, for the time that their hands could still sign treaties and their swords still be drawn for the right reasons, the web held. Robb rose slowly from his knees, feeling the bark under his palm one last time. I'm going back south in the spring, he told the tree. One more council. One more argument about grain and tariffs. I'm going to watch your Queen of Dragonstone glare at your Queen of the South until they both realize they're saying the same thing in different words. Da. The snow fell around him, soft and steady. After that, he said more softly, I think I'll come home and stay. He turned to go, the godswood silence at his back. In the shadows between the roots, unseen by all but a few leaves and one distant mind, an old, faint echo of a boy's voice whispered, You did well. Robb did not hear it. He stepped out into the yard, into the noise and mess of life, his hand already lifting to beckon a group of squabbling children nearer, so he could settle their dispute before someone lost an eye. The war was long over. The battle went on. And in every timeline that mattered, in every branch where the world still spun and men still breathed, Robb Stark's northern armies, and the dragons and free folk and Baratheon ships and Dornish spears that had marched with them, had given the Seven Kingdoms something worth fighting for, that was not merely another sharp-edged chair. It was not perfection. It was enough.